When my husband grabbed my braids and slammed me against our marble kitchen island, the sound of my leg snapping echoed louder than his screaming. As I lay on the cold floor staring up at him and his 24-year-old intern, I did not cry. Instead, I turned my head slightly toward the dining table. Hidden in the shadows beneath it was my 5-year-old daughter holding a stuffed bear. I blinked twice. She reached inside the bear and pressed the single speed dial button we had practiced for months. Grandpa Mom is about to die. I am Nia. I am 35 years old and I work as a forensic accountant. I spend my days tracking hidden assets, unraveling complex financial webs, and exposing corporate fraud for a living. But the greatest fraud I ever uncovered was sleeping in my own bed. Before I take you through the darkest night of my life, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit the like button and subscribe if you have ever had to outsmart a narcissist who thought they had completely broken you. Believe me, the revenge you are about to hear is a masterclass in financial and legal destruction. It was a Tuesday evening in late October. The air in our custom-built Atlanta home was thick with the smell of the rosemary roast I had just pulled from the oven. For years I had played the role of the perfect wife, balancing a demanding career while maintaining the flawless image of our marriage. Darius, my husband, was a charismatic sales director. To the outside world, we were the ultimate power couple. But behind closed doors, he was a master manipulator who had spent the last 7 years slowly and systematically isolating me from my family and friends. He came home late that night, his tailored suit smelling faintly of cheap vanilla perfume and expensive gin. I had spent the afternoon analyzing our joint accounts. My trained eyes had caught something that a regular spouse might miss. Small, consistent transfers moving into an LLC I had never heard of. When I finally confronted him about the missing $50,000, the mask he had worn for our entire marriage completely slipped. He did not deny it. He did not make excuses or try to gaslight me the way he usually did. His eyes went completely dark, devoid of any warmth or humanity. Before I could brace myself, he lunged across the kitchen island. His large hands twisted violently into my freshly braided hair. The physical force was so sudden and overwhelming that my feet actually left the ground. He threw me backward with everything he had. Time seemed to slow down as I fell toward the imported Italian tile. When my right leg hit the sharp edge of the lower wooden cabinets, a loud, unnatural crack ripped through the room. The pain was blinding. It was a white-hot flash of agony that stole the breath straight out of my lungs and sent a shockwave up my spine. I crumpled to the floor, my vision blurring at the edges as the metallic taste of blood filled my mouth from biting my own tongue. But the physical agony was nothing compared to the psychological violence of what happened next. Footsteps clicked softly down the hardwood stairs in the hallway. It was Jasmine. She was 24, his newest sales intern, and she was wearing my custom silk robe. She sauntered into the kitchen, stepping carefully over my legs to avoid getting anything on her bare feet. She looked down at me with a smirk that twisted her face into something incredibly ugly. She leaned against the stainless steel refrigerator, crossing her arms, as if she were watching a mildly entertaining television show. Darius stood over me calmly, straightening his shirt cuffs. He reached into the inner pocket of his suit jacket and pulled out a thick stack of legal documents. He tossed them casually onto my chest. They slid off my shirt and scattered across the cold tiles. "Sign them," he demanded, his voice eerily calm and completely devoid of remorse. "You are giving me the house, full custody of Amara, and you are taking the debt from the new company. You are going to sign these divorce papers tonight, Nia, or I swear to God I will tell the police you had a psychotic break, attacked us, and fell. I have the medical connections to make sure you are locked in a psychiatric ward by morning." My leg was throbbing with a sickening rhythm, and I could feel the rapid swelling pushing tightly against the fabric of my work trousers. Every natural human instinct in my body screamed at me to cry, to beg for mercy, to ask how the man who vowed to protect me could stand there plotting my total destruction with his mistress. But I am not built that way. My entire career is built on maintaining absolute composure while dissecting disasters. I looked at the papers scattered on the floor. I saw the clauses designed to strip me of the generational wealth my grandparents had built. I saw his desperate attempt to cover up his financial crimes by burying me in his debt. He thought I was just a defeated woman bleeding on the floor. He forgot that I tracked dirty money for a living, and I already knew exactly where every stolen cent had gone. I looked up at Darius, taking deep, measured breaths through my nose to manage the excruciating pain. I refused to shed a single tear. Giving him my pain would be giving him power, and I was entirely done funding his fragile ego. Jasmine chuckled softly from the fridge. Look at her, she is in shock. She is pathetic, Darius. Just make her sign the papers so we can pack her things and get her out of here. I cannot stand looking at her anymore. I ignored the intern completely. My eyes darted slightly to the left, looking past Darius and his polished Italian leather shoes toward the dark mahogany dining table in the adjoining room. The floor-length tablecloth was draped low, but I could clearly see the tiny trembling silhouette of my daughter. Amara had slipped downstairs when the yelling started. She was crouching in the shadows, clutching her favorite brown teddy bear tightly to her chest. Her beautiful brown eyes were wide with sheer terror. I caught her gaze. Despite the agony radiating through my body, I offered her a tiny reassuring nod, followed by a deliberate double blink. It was our secret signal. For the past 6 months, ever since I started noticing the financial discrepancies and Darius's escalating emotional abuse, I had prepared her for an emergency scenario. I knew his temper was a ticking time bomb. I had bought a cheap prepaid phone, programmed it with only one phone number, and carefully sewed it deep into the stuffing of her bear. Amara did not cry out. She was so brave. She unzipped the hidden compartment with shaky little fingers. She pulled out the small device and pressed the single speed dial button. I knew exactly who was on the other end of that line. It was Elias Sterling, my father, a retired federal judge in the state of Georgia. He was the man Darius had spent years manipulating me into avoiding, convincing me that my family was toxic and that only he truly loved me. Darius thought I was completely isolated. He thought he had successfully severed my roots and left me defenseless. But as I lay there feeling the agonizing pulse of my shattered bone, I knew something he did not. The trap was already set, the call was made, and the wrath of an African-American father, who had spent 30 years destroying criminals in a federal courtroom, was currently hurtling toward this very house. I just had to stay alive, play his twisted game a little longer, and watch Darius unknowingly dig his own grave. Darius caught the faint, unmistakable beep of the mobile phone connecting. His head snapped away from me and darted toward the shadows under the dining room table. The smug, victorious satisfaction completely drained from his face, instantly replaced by a frantic, wild panic. "What is she doing under there?" he yelled, his voice cracking as he lunged past the kitchen island. I tried to throw my upper body forward to block his path, but the jagged ends of my fractured bone ground together. A wave of nausea so violent and intense washed over me that my vision went entirely black for a second. He ripped the long tablecloth back, exposing Amara. My sweet little girl flinched, dropping the stuffed bear onto the hardwood floor. Darius snatched the toy with ruthless aggression, tearing the back seam wide open and pulling out the small prepaid phone. His thumb frantically jammed the red end call button, but it was too late. The screen showed the call had already connected and disconnected. The duration was only 6 seconds, but 6 seconds was all a former federal judge needed to trace a panic signal. "Who did she call?" Darius screamed, turning back to me with absolute fury radiating from his eyes. "Who did you tell her to call?" I did not answer him. I just stared at his panicked face, forcing my breathing to remain slow and rhythmic. In my line of work as a forensic accountant, the most crucial rule is silence. You never show the target your hand until the audit is complete and the federal authorities are waiting at the front door. Jasmine gasped loudly, taking a stumbling step backward until her back hit the stainless steel refrigerator. The reality of the situation was finally penetrating her thick skull. Playing house with a wealthy married man was glamorous until the threat of prison time entered the equation. "Darius, we need to leave right now," she whined, clutching the lapels of my silk robe. "If the police show up here and find her like this, my career in corporate sales is completely over. I cannot be associated with a domestic violence charge." "Shut your mouth, Jasmine!" Darius barked, pacing aggressively across the kitchen floor. He ran his hands over his head, his mind racing to calculate his next move. He knew he could not dial 911 for an ambulance. Paramedics arriving at the scene meant mandatory reporting to the authorities. Mandatory reporting meant a police investigation, forensic photographs of my injuries, and an immediate arrest warrant for aggravated assault. He stopped pacing and pulled his own sleek smartphone from his tailored suit pocket. "I need to make a secure call," he muttered, walking briskly down the hallway and out of my line of sight. When he returned to the kitchen 10 minutes later, his panic had completely vanished. He looked entirely too calm, adjusting his cuffs with that same arrogant precision. "Help is on the way," he said, looking down at me with a chilling, empty smile. "But it is not the kind of help you are hoping for." I lay there in agonizing pain for another 20 minutes. Every time my heart beat, a fresh wave of fire shot up my right leg. Amara had silently crept away to her bedroom, hiding in her closet, just as we had practiced for emergencies. Then the heavy oak front door clicked open. It was not the police. It was Trent. Trent was my sister-in-law, Keisha's husband. He was a wealthy white orthopedic surgeon who ran a highly lucrative private sports medicine clinic in the affluent neighborhood of Buckhead. Trent walked into my kitchen carrying a heavy black leather medical bag. He did not look worried. He looked mildly inconvenienced. He was wearing an expensive cashmere sweater and designer loafers, looking like he had just been interrupted during a late-night golf club dinner. He casually surveyed the scene, looking at me bleeding on the floor, then at Darius, and finally at the unnatural angle of my shattered leg. "This is incredibly messy, Darius." Trent sighed heavily, dropping his heavy medical bag onto the marble countertop. "I specifically told you to keep your domestic issues quiet and under control." I tried to speak, to force my vocal cords to tell Trent that Darius had assaulted me and was trying to steal my assets, but my voice came out as a weak, ragged whisper. Trent did not even grant me the basic dignity of making eye contact. He unzipped his bag and pulled out a large syringe alongside a small glass vial of clear liquid. "What is that?" I managed to say, trying desperately to push myself backward across the tiles, but my body refused to cooperate. "Just a little something to take the edge off your nerves," Nia, Trent said, in a smooth, practiced bedside voice that made my skin crawl. "You are highly agitated right now. We need you nice and calm before I can even attempt to stabilize this fracture." He did not wait for my consent. He did not ask about my allergies or explain the medication. He simply knelt beside me, grabbed my upper arm with a grip that bruised my skin, and plunged the needle deep into my muscle. Almost immediately, a heavy, suffocating fog began to roll through my brain. The sharp, bright edges of the kitchen lights blurred into soft halos. The blinding pain in my leg dulled to a distant, heavy throb, but my limbs suddenly felt like they were filled with wet cement. I could not move my fingers. I could not speak. I could only lie there, paralyzed and chemically subdued, listening as these two men stood over my body and clinically plotted the theft of my life. "I will write up the official medical chart at my clinic tonight," Trent said, his voice echoing as if he were speaking from underwater. "We will document that she suffered a severe manic episode. We will state she was acting erratically, lost her balance during a hysterical fit, and took a terrible fall down the main wooden staircase." Darius chuckled softly, a sound that made bile rise in my throat. "Will the hospital board or the insurance company actually buy that story?" Darius asked. Trent scoffed loudly, a disgusting sound absolutely saturated in arrogant white male privilege. "Please, Darius, just look at her. She is a high-stress corporate woman working in finance. You know exactly how these strong black women get when they feel like they cannot control their environment. They get defensive, they get aggressive and entirely unreasonable. The medical community is always primed and ready to believe the angry black woman trope. It is practically an unwritten diagnostic code in my profession at this point. I will simply say I came over for a routine family visit, found her having a psychological breakdown, and she accidentally injured herself while aggressively resisting my medical assistance. It is completely airtight, and no one will question a respected surgeon over an unstable woman. I lay there trapped inside my own failing body, forced to listen to this mediocre, corrupt doctor weaponize my race and my gender to protect my abuser. Jasmine walked back into the room, having recovered her nerve, and began pouring herself a generous glass of my expensive vintage red wine. But what if she recovers and calls her family to intervene? Jasmine asked, taking a long sip of the wine. Trent laughed again, zipping up his leather medical bag with a sharp final sound. What family? Trent asked mockingly, looking down at my drooping eyes. Darius has played this long game perfectly. He spent the last 7 years convincing Nia that her father was a controlling toxic monster who never truly loved her. She has not spoken a single word to the Honorable Judge Sterling since the day he refused to attend their wedding. If that old man was still in the picture, Darius and I would both lose our professional licenses, and we would be sitting in a federal penitentiary by midnight. But nobody is coming to save her. She isolated herself. She is completely alone. As the heavy sedative finally pulled me down into darkness, my last conscious thought was not fear. It was a cold, calculating promise. Darius had spent years isolating me, but he had drastically underestimated the bond between a father and a daughter. They thought I was alone, but they had no idea that a federal storm was already gathering, and I was going to use their arrogance to burn their entire lives to the ground. The heavy fog of the sedative lifted slowly, replaced by a dull, throbbing ache radiating from my right leg. I opened my eyes to the harsh morning sunlight filtering through the plantation shutters of my master bedroom. My leg was encased in a thick, rigid fiberglass cast from my upper thigh down to my toes. My mouth felt like cotton, and my head was pounding from the chemical cocktail Trent had pumped into my bloodstream. Before I could fully process the nightmare of the previous night, the sharp chime of our front doorbell echoed through the house. Heavy, authoritative knocks immediately followed. It was the police. A neighbor must have heard the crash and called it in. I heard the front door open downstairs, followed by the deep rumbling voice of a male officer. I tried to push myself up against the headboard, but my muscles still felt like lead. Footsteps approached the bedroom stairs. Darius walked into the room first, his face a flawless mask of deep, manufactured concern. He was dressed in a soft cashmere sweater, looking every bit the exhausted, devoted husband. He had even put on a fresh pot of coffee. I could smell the rich Colombian roast drifting up from the kitchen. He was playing his role perfectly. 2 uniformed Atlanta police officers stepped into the room behind him. "Officer, as I explained downstairs, my wife has been under a tremendous amount of corporate stress," Darius said, his voice dripping with fake sympathy. "She had a severe manic episode last night. She lost her balance on the landing and took a terrible fall." One of the officers, an older white man with a graying mustache, stepped forward and looked down at me. "Mom, we received a noise complaint from the house next door. Can you tell us what happened?" I opened my mouth to speak, to scream that my husband had shattered my bone and that his mistress was likely hiding in the guest room. But Darius smoothly intercepted, stepping right into the officer's line of sight. "Here is the medical report from her attending physician," Darius said, handing over a crisp white folder bearing Trent's prestigious clinic logo. "Dr. Trent Vance came to the house last night to stabilize her. He administered a heavy sedative because she was a danger to herself. The report details her psychological distress and the accidental nature of the fracture." The officer opened the folder and reviewed the document. Trent's signature carried massive weight. In this affluent neighborhood, the written word of a wealthy white surgeon easily overpowered the sluggish, drugged whispers of a black woman recovering from an alleged psychotic break. If I screamed now, I would look exactly like the hysterical woman Trent described on that paper. Darius would use it as immediate grounds to have me committed to a psychiatric ward, and I would be dragged out of my house, leaving my 5-year-old daughter completely alone with these monsters. I had to bite my tongue. The officer nodded, handed the file back to Darius, and tipped his hat. "Make sure she gets plenty of rest, sir. Have a good day." I watched the officers turn around and leave, feeling the heavy iron gates of my own home lock me inside. The front door clicked shut downstairs. Darius stood at the foot of my bed, dropping the concerned husband act instantly. His face twisted into a smug, arrogant grin. He did not say a word to me. He simply turned and walked back downstairs. Less than 5 minutes later, the front door opened again. This time it was accompanied by the distinct, rhythmic clicking of hard plastic wheels rolling over the hardwood floor. Suitcases. I heard Jasmine's high-pitched giggle echoing in the foyer. The sheer audacity was breathtaking. My blood boiled, but my training as a forensic accountant kept my expression completely blank. You do not react when the suspect makes a mistake. You simply document it and let them hang themselves. The bedroom door swung open. Jasmine stood there holding an expensive iced latte flanked by two massive pink designer suitcases. She looked around my sanctuary, her eyes lingering on the custom velvet headboard, the imported silk drapes, and the expansive walk-in closet I had designed myself. "Wow, this room has so much better natural light than the guest room," she announced, completely ignoring the fact that I was lying in the bed. Darius walked in behind her carrying a third heavy travel bag. He casually set it down near my antique vanity. "What are you doing?" I asked, my voice finally finding a steady, cold pitch. Darius smirked, walking over to my nightstand and sweeping my personal cell phone, my smartwatch, and my work laptop into his arms. "Jasmine is moving in Nia," he stated flatly as if discussing the weather. "She needs a safe place to stay, and since you are completely incapacitated, she is going to help me run the household. You are going to stay in this room and heal. You will not leave this bed. You will not cause a scene in front of Amara, or I will use that medical file to have you committed by this afternoon." Jasmine giggled again, walking past my bed and straight into my ensuite bathroom. I could hear her opening my glass cabinets, rummaging through my expensive skincare products and my imported perfumes. She came out a moment later carrying a plastic hospital-grade bedpan. She tossed it carelessly onto the foot of the bed. It bounced against my fiberglass cast, sending a fresh jolt of sharp pain up my spine. "Since you cannot walk to the bathroom, I figured you would need this," Jasmine sneered, crossing her arms. "Do not worry about Darius or the house. I will make sure all his needs are completely taken care of. And maybe I will reorganize that closet of yours while I am at it. You have a lot of nice things that are just going to waste sitting in here." They turned off the main bedroom light, plunging the room into shadows. They walked out into the hallway together, and a second later, I heard the distinct metallic click of the deadbolt sliding into place from the outside. They had installed a lock on the outside of my bedroom door while I was unconscious. They had locked me inside my own room like a prisoner. I lay there in the dim light, staring at the sterile plastic bedpan resting against my broken leg. They wanted me to break. They wanted to strip away every single ounce of my dignity until I was nothing more than a hollow, humiliated shell, willing to sign away my house and my money just to escape the psychological torture. They wanted me to feel utterly powerless in the very home I had paid for. But Darius forgot who he married. He forgot that I survived auditing the most ruthless, corrupt corporate executives in America. A locked door and a plastic pan were not going to break my spirit. They were just adding zeros to the final bill they were going to pay. I slowly reached my hand under the thick mattress, feeling around the wooden slats until my fingers brushed against a small, hard object. It was a secondary USB drive wirelessly linked to the hidden cameras I had installed weeks ago. Every second of their gloating, every threat, and every stolen item was being recorded in crystal clear high definition. I gripped the drive tightly in my hand. Let them play house. The audit had officially begun. Hours dragged on, painting the bedroom in deep shades of charcoal as the sun finally dipped below the Atlanta skyline. Downstairs, the house was alive with the sickening sounds of celebration. Through the floorboards and the central air conditioning vents, I could hear the clinking of my expensive crystal wine glasses and the heavy bass of the surround sound system playing Darius's favorite jazz playlist. Soon the music was drowned out by the unmistakable rhythmic creaking of the custom Italian leather sofa in the living room. Jasmine's exaggerated moans echoed up the stairwell, followed by Darius's low, arrogant laughter. They were consummating their hostile takeover of my life, right beneath me, entirely convinced that I was lying in the dark above them, crying my eyes out into a tear-soaked pillow. But my eyes were completely dry. I sat propped up against the velvet headboard, ignoring the dull, persistent throb radiating from my heavy fiberglass cast. I slowly pulled my hand out from underneath the thick mattress. Resting in my palm was not just a piece of plastic and metal. It was a high-capacity military-grade encrypted flash drive. When Darius emptied my nightstand and took my personal cell phone and my work laptop, he thought he had completely severed my connection to the outside world and destroyed any leverage I might have had. He fundamentally misunderstood the nature of the woman he married. I am a forensic accountant. People often mistake my profession for simple corporate bookkeeping. They think I sit in a gray cubicle all day looking at tax returns and balancing company ledgers. But forensic accounting is not just about numbers. It is about tracking human behavior. It is about anticipating the desperate, greedy, and arrogant footprints that criminals leave behind when they think they are smarter than the justice system. Over the past decade, I have dismantled multi-million-dollar embezzlement rings and brought down untouchable corporate executives by finding the one tiny loose thread they forgot to cut. I had noticed that loose thread in my own marriage exactly 8 days ago. It started with a subtle anomaly in our joint investment portfolio, a minor discrepancy that any normal wife would have brushed off as a banking error or a market fluctuation. But I pulled the thread. I spent 3 sleepless nights running a shadow audit on our finances, and I successfully traced $50,000 missing from our accounts into a shadow shell company. Knowing Darius's volatile temper and his narcissistic need for absolute control, I knew that confronting him with a printed spreadsheet would immediately trigger his violent defense mechanisms. He would gaslight me, hide the assets deeper into offshore accounts, and manipulate the narrative to make me look crazy. I needed irrefutable proof of his secret lifestyle and his physical aggression before I made my move. So 3 days before he broke my leg, I waited for him to leave on what he claimed was a weekend golfing trip with Trent. I hired a private security contractor I frequently use for high-stakes corporate espionage cases. Within 4 hours, they had hardwired 6 microscopic lenses into the architectural framework of my home. One was perfectly concealed inside the digital display of the smart oven in the kitchen. Another was nested inside the intricate crown molding of the living room, angled perfectly toward the very sofa where Jasmine was currently screaming my husband's name. A third covered the front entryway and the main staircase. Every single camera was motion-activated recording in stunning 4K resolution and programmed to bypass the home's main internet router. Instead, they transmitted data directly to an independent hidden local server built into the false bottom of my bedroom closet, which automatically synced every hour to the encrypted drive currently sitting in my hand. I carefully reached behind the heavy wooden headboard of my bed. Taped to the back panel was a flat waterproof pouch containing a secondary untraceable mini tablet I strictly used for undercover field audits. I powered the device on the cool blue light illuminating the dark bedroom and plugged the flash drive into the side port. Before I looked at anything else, I opened the live feed for Amar's bedroom. A wave of profound relief washed over me as I saw the night vision footage of my sweet 5-year-old daughter sleeping soundly in her bed, clutching a different stuffed animal. She was safe. She had done her job perfectly, and now it was time for me to do mine. I opened the master video folder labeled Kitchen Point of View. The media player loaded instantly. The audio was horrifyingly crisp. I watched myself confront him about the missing money. I saw the exact moment his eyes went completely dead. I watched his large hands twist violently into my braids, lifting me off my feet and throwing me backward with lethal intent. The microphone picked up the sickening sharp crack of my bone breaking against the wooden cabinetry with perfect agonizing clarity. But the true goldmine of this digital evidence was what happened next. I fast-forwarded the footage to Trent's arrival. The hidden camera captured every single detail of his arrogant stride. It recorded him dropping his designer medical bag on my counter and pulling out the syringe. It captured the exact dosage of the heavy unprescribed sedative he injected into my arm, without my verbal or written consent. And most importantly, the sensitive microphones picked up every single racist, misogynistic word that fell from the wealthy white surgeon's mouth. I listened to Trent legally conspire with my abuser to fabricate an official medical chart. I listened to him casually weaponize my race, stating he would use the angry black woman trope to justify my severe injuries to the medical board and the police. This was no longer just a domestic violence case. What I was holding in my hands was the absolute, undeniable destruction of 3 separate lives. Darius would face decades in prison for aggravated assault and attempted extortion. Jasmine would be named as an accessory after the fact and lose any chance of a corporate career. But Trent was the biggest prize. Trent was going to lose his prestigious medical license, his lucrative private practice, his sprawling mansion, and his freedom for medical malpractice, administering narcotics without patient consent, and falsifying official medical documents to cover up a violent felony. The sheer magnitude of the prison time staring back at me from that small tablet screen was intoxicating. I had them. The evidence was completely airtight, perfectly preserved, and utterly damning. I safely ejected the flash drive and slid the tablet back into its hidden pouch behind the headboard. I needed to sleep. I needed to conserve my physical energy for the psychological warfare that would undoubtedly resume in the morning when Darius came back to demand my signature on those divorce papers. I closed my eyes, letting the ambient silence of the second floor settle around me as the sickening noises downstairs finally faded into a drunken, exhausted quiet. Suddenly, a sharp, distinct sound cut through the heavy silence of my bedroom. My eyes snapped open. I held my breath, straining my ears toward the locked bedroom door, expecting to hear Darius's heavy footsteps marching down the hallway. But the sound was not coming from inside the house. It was coming from the large glass window on the far side of the room, overlooking the sprawling fenced backyard. My master bedroom was on the second floor. It was a straight 20-foot drop to the manicured lawn below, and there were no tall trees close enough for branches to brush against the glass. Yet the sound came again. It was a deliberate, rhythmic tapping against the reinforced window pane. Tap, 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 tap. A brief pause. Tap, tap, tap. My heart hammered against my ribs, not from fear, but from a sudden, overwhelming surge of adrenaline that made my fingertips tingle. I recognized that specific acoustic rhythm instantly. It was a variation of Morse code. When I was a little girl, long before my father was appointed to the federal bench, he had served as an elite intelligence officer in the military. He used to tap that exact sequence on my bedroom door every single night when it was time for lights out. It translated to 3 simple words: I am here. Darius thought he had successfully built an impenetrable fortress to keep me locked inside and isolated from the world. He had no idea that my father had already breached the perimeter. The rhythmic tapping on the glass was the lifeline I desperately needed. I did not move toward the window or make a single sound. I knew my father was a seasoned professional. He was simply establishing the perimeter and letting me know that his network was officially in place. I closed my eyes and allowed myself the first genuine night of sleep I had experienced in an entire week. When the morning sun finally broke through the heavy window blinds, the harsh reality of my situation settled right back over me. My leg was still a heavy block of absolute agony, and I was still a prisoner locked inside my own master bedroom. Around 10 in the morning, the heavy wooden front door swung open downstairs. A loud, boisterous voice echoed up the main stairwell. It was Keisha. Keisha was Darius's younger sister, a 30-year-old woman who had spent her entire adult life coasting effortlessly on the financial generosity of others. She had always harbored a deep-seated bitter jealousy toward me. While I spent my 20s studying relentlessly for my certified public accountant exams and building a formidable corporate career, Keisha was busy bouncing between failed business ventures and demanding family loans she never had any intention of repaying. I had permanently cut off her financial pipeline 3 years ago, a boundary she never forgave me for establishing. Now, with me completely incapacitated and locked away, she clearly saw the perfect opportunity to strike back and claim what she felt she deserved. Footsteps pounded heavily up the carpeted stairs. The deadbolt on my bedroom door clicked open, and Keisha marched into the room like a conquering general entering a defeated city. Jasmine trailed closely behind her, holding two large empty laundry baskets. Keisha did not ask how I was doing. She did not express a single ounce of basic human sympathy for the massive fiberglass cast elevating my right leg or the dark bruises forming along my jawline. Instead, she looked down at me with an expression of pure, unadulterated triumph. She was wearing a cheap velour tracksuit clearly ready for a long day of heavy lifting, but it was not cleaning or organizing she had in mind. It was looting. "Well, well, well," Keisha sneered, walking past the foot of my bed without a second glance. "Look how the mighty corporate executive has finally fallen. I guess all that money and fancy education could not keep you from tripping over your own feet like a clumsy fool." Jasmine giggled loudly, a high grating sound that made my jaw clench tight. The two of them bypassed my bed entirely and marched straight into my custom-built walk-in closet. For the next 30 minutes, I was forced to lie there in absolute silence and listen to the systematic pillaging of my personal property. I heard the sharp scrape of wooden hangers sliding rapidly across the metal clothing racks. I heard the soft rustle of silk garment bags being aggressively ripped open. I heard the distinct heavy snap of my velvet jewelry boxes being popped open one by one. They were treating my life's hard work like a free luxury shopping spree. They emerged from the closet periodically to throw piles of my expensive clothing into the plastic laundry baskets. Jasmine was trying on my custom-tailored blazers, loudly complaining to Keisha that my shoulders were too broad and masculine for the delicate fabric. Keisha walked out holding my limited edition Oxblood Telfar shopping bag. It was a highly sought-after anniversary gift I had bought for myself after successfully closing a massive corporate fraud case. She slung it over her shoulder with an attitude of complete careless entitlement. She then reached into her pocket and pulled out my grandmother's vintage gold bangle, sliding it onto her own wrist and admiring how the heavy gold caught the bright morning light. "Do not look at me like that," Nia Keisha said, finally noticing my cold, unblinking stare. She sauntered over to my bedside, the stolen gold bangle clinking sharply against my wooden nightstand. "You are not going to be walking anywhere nice for a very long time, so you really do not need these luxury items just gathering dust in the dark. Jasmine is going to need to look highly presentable when she accompanies my brother to his important corporate dinners. You should be thanking us for keeping your nice things in circulation instead of being so incredibly selfish." I remained completely silent, focusing my gaze slightly past her shoulder, directly at the hidden camera lens, perfectly concealed inside the digital alarm clock across the room. Keisha mistook my strategic silence for absolute defeat. She leaned closer to my face, her breath smelling strongly of stale coffee and cheap peppermint gum. "You always thought you were so much better than this family." Keisha spat, her voice dripping with years of accumulated venom. "You walked around this house with your fancy college degrees and your high-paying accounting job acting like the ultimate strong black woman who had the entire world figured out. Well, since you are so incredibly strong and so fiercely independent, you can deal with a broken leg all by yourself. You do not need my brother taking care of you. Strong black women do not need help, right? That is what society says. So stop being a burden." She picked up the sterile plastic hospital bedpan that Jasmine had tossed on my bed the previous night and tapped it mockingly against my hard fiberglass cast. "You need to do everyone in this family a massive favor and sign those divorce papers Darius gave you last night. Sign the deed to this house over to him. You know as well as I do that you are way too obsessed with your career to be a proper submissive wife anyway. My brother is a highly successful man who deserves a woman who actually respects his authority. He deserves a young woman who can give him a healthy son to carry on the family name, not a miserable barren workaholic who fights him at every single turn. Jasmine is young. She is fertile. She is exactly what this family needs to move forward. The sheer breathtaking audacity of her words hung heavily in the air. Keisha was actively cheering for the total destruction of my marriage, completely blind to the fact that her precious brother was currently bankrupting himself to fund his reckless, adulterous lifestyle. She was standing in a massive custom home that my salary had completely paid for wearing expensive jewelry my beloved grandmother had left me, telling me that I was the one who lacked any real value. They were weaponizing my ambition and my race, deliberately using the destructive expectation that black women are supposed to endure endless suffering, disrespect, and abuse without uttering a single complaint. They finally finished their raid, dragging 2 overflowing baskets of my designer clothes, my expensive leather handbags, and my irreplaceable heirloom jewelry out into the upstairs hallway. Keisha paused at the door, turning back to give me one last look of absolute unfiltered disgust. "Do not even bother yelling out the window for help," she warned, pointing a manicured finger at me. "Darius already told all the neighbors in the cul-de-sac that you are highly unstable and going through severe medication withdrawals. He warned them that you might scream or make up wild stories. Nobody in this affluent neighborhood is going to listen to a crazy, hysterical woman." She slammed the heavy wooden door shut, and the deadbolt clicked firmly into place once again, plunging me back into isolation. As their footsteps faded down the stairs, I did not shed a single tear over the stolen items. I did not feel a shred of despair. In the state of Georgia, grand larceny is a very serious felony. Taking personal items worth more than $25,000 carries a mandatory minimum prison sentence. Between the vintage gold bangle, the designer bags, and the custom clothing, Keisha and Jasmine had just casually walked out of my bedroom with over $40,000 worth of my personal property. They thought they were humiliating me and stripping me of my dignity, but all they had really done was hand me the exact legal rope they were going to hang themselves with. The silence that settled over my master bedroom after Keisha and Jasmine walked out with my stolen belongings was profound, but it was not the silence of defeat. It was the quiet before a calculated, devastating storm. I waited a full 10 minutes, listening closely to the sounds of the house. I heard the front door open and close as Keisha finally left her car engine roaring to life in my driveway. Downstairs, Jasmine turned on the television, the muffled sounds of a daytime talk show vibrating faintly through the floorboards. I was finally alone, and it was time to establish my connection to the outside world. I reached up to the thick, neatly parted box braids at the crown of my head. I had specifically gotten my hair braided 2 weeks ago, requesting extra length and volume for a very specific reason. My fingers traced the familiar pattern of the synthetic hair, moving carefully toward the nape of my neck. Hidden deeply within the tight weave of one specific braid was a microscopic Bluetooth earpiece, a specialized piece of communication equipment typically reserved for deep-cover federal informants. It was entirely invisible to the naked eye and undetectable by standard electronic sweeps. I pressed my fingernail against the tiny concealed pressure pad. A faint, almost imperceptible static hummed directly into my right ear canal. "Nia." The voice was deep, resonant, and remarkably calm. It was the voice of Elias Sterling. Hearing my father speak my name for the first time in 7 years sent a powerful shockwave of emotion straight through my chest, but I forced myself to swallow it down. This was not the time for a tearful family reunion. This was a highly tactical operation. "I am here," I whispered, keeping my voice barely above a breath so the sound would not travel beyond my mattress. "The camera feed is active. Did you capture the footage from last night?" "We have everything," my father replied, his tone carrying the precise, unyielding authority of a man who had spent 3 decades presiding over a federal courtroom. "We have the assault. We have the doctor administering the sedative. We have the verbal conspiracy to commit medical fraud. And as of 10 minutes ago, we have crystal clear footage of your sister-in-law committing grand larceny. You are doing an incredible job, baby girl. I am so proud of you. Then why am I still locked in this room? I asked, the throbbing pain in my leg sharpening my words. If you have the evidence, why hasn't a federal tactical team kicked my front door off its hinges and dragged them out in handcuffs? I am lying here with a shattered leg. Because of the doctor, my father explained patiently, laying out the brutal legal reality of our situation. Trent Vance is not just a wealthy white orthopedic surgeon. He is deeply connected within the Fulton County Medical Board. That fabricated medical chart he created last night is a massive immediate threat to you and Amara. If I send agents into that house right now, Darius is going to play the role of the terrified husband. He will hand over that medical file to the local authorities and claim that you called your estranged father in the middle of a drug-induced paranoid psychotic break. My blood ran completely cold as I realized exactly what Darius had planned. A conservatorship, I whispered into the empty room. Exactly, my father confirmed. In the state of Georgia, if a highly respected physician signs a sworn affidavit stating that a patient is a severe danger to herself and suffering from a violent manic episode, the family court system moves with terrifying speed. Darius would file an emergency ex parte petition before the sun goes down. He would use your high-stress corporate career and Trent's racist fabricated psychological profile to strip you of your fundamental legal rights. The court would grant him immediate temporary guardianship over your finances, your medical decisions, and most importantly, full legal custody of Amara. He could drain your bank accounts legally, and if you fought back, it would only make you look far more unstable. We cannot just arrest him for domestic assault. My father continued, his voice hardening into absolute steel. A high-priced defense attorney would muddy the waters with that medical report, claim it was a tragic accident, and drag you through a humiliating public trial for years. We do not just want to arrest Darius. We want to completely obliterate his credibility, dismantle his financial network, and lock him and his co-conspirators in a federal penitentiary for a very long time. To do that, we need to bypass the local family court entirely and elevate this to a multi-million-dollar federal racketeering and wire fraud case. How do we do that? I asked, my mind already shifting back into the cold, calculating gears of a forensic accountant. We need him to spring his own trap, my father said. Darius wants you to sign over the house and take on the debt of his fraudulent shell company. He thinks you are completely broken. He thinks you have no way out. We need to let him bring those fraudulent legal documents to you. We need him to attempt to extort your signature on camera with his lawyer present, proving absolute premeditation and financial motive. That is the federal crime that overrides any fake medical chart Trent could ever write. You want me to play along, I said, understanding the assignment perfectly. You have to play the defeated, terrified wife my father instructed. You have to make him believe he has won completely. But you are not alone, Nia. I have 3 unmarked federal surveillance vehicles parked at the end of your cul-de-sac right now. We have tapped directly into your local server. We are watching every single angle of that house in real time. If Darius or that woman even looks at Amara the wrong way, my agents will breach your walls in under 30 seconds. But as long as you are physically safe in that bed, we wait for him to make his final, fatal legal move. He wants me to sign the papers tomorrow, I whispered, recalling the threat Darius had made before leaving the room last night. He is throwing a birthday dinner for himself here at the house. He said his lawyer will be present to finalize the divorce and the asset transfer. Perfect, my father said, a dangerous satisfaction echoing in his voice. Let him gather all his accomplices in one room. My team is preparing a specialized document for you to sign. I will have it slipped into the house before the party. Just rest your leg, conserve your energy, and let the criminals build their own gallows. The communication feed clicked off, returning my ear to absolute silence. The throbbing in my leg was still there, and the door was still locked from the outside, but I no longer felt like a helpless victim trapped in a nightmare. I was a highly trained operative sitting in the middle of a federal sting operation. I took a slow, deep breath, mentally preparing myself for the performance of a lifetime. But before I could simply rest, I had one more task to complete. I reached back under my mattress and pulled out my hidden undercover tablet. It was time to dig deeper into the fraudulent shell company Darius had created and find out exactly how much money he had stolen to fund his pathetic double life. I settled back against the headboard and powered up the encrypted tablet. The soft blue glow of the screen was the only source of light in the shadowed bedroom. Since Darius had aggressively confiscated my primary laptop and my personal cell phone, he assumed my ability to investigate his finances was completely neutralized. He thought he had cut me off from the world. He did not realize that a seasoned forensic accountant never relies on a single point of access. During my initial shadow audit last week, I had anticipated his attempts to isolate me. I had quietly installed a subtle tracking script on his personal computer and our home internet router. I connected the tablet to my hidden network and effortlessly bypassed the standard secure socket layers of our joint banking portal. I brought up the digital ledgers and began my work. The $50,000 I had confronted him about before he broke my leg was just the tip of a massive financial iceberg. I started running a deep data scrape following the digital breadcrumbs he had carelessly left across multiple banking institutions. Darius was a charismatic sales director, not a financial architect. His attempts at money laundering were arrogant, sloppy, and incredibly easy for a trained professional to dismantle. He had established a limited liability company under Jasmine's maiden name, registering it to a cheap virtual office building in downtown Atlanta. I watched the columns of numbers rapidly populate on my screen. The money was flowing out of our joint savings accounts, our retirement funds, and even a second mortgage he had secretly taken out against this very house. He was bleeding our marital assets completely dry to fund luxury car leases, expensive designer jewelry, and a high-end apartment rental for his young mistress. Every single transaction scrolling past my eyes was a fresh stab of betrayal, but I actively pushed the emotion down. Emotion clouds judgment, and right now I needed absolute clarity to build an airtight federal indictment. As I cross-referenced the routing numbers and the transaction timestamps, a new, far more sinister pattern began to emerge on the screen. The dummy corporation was not just receiving stolen money from our personal marital accounts. There were massive systematic deposits coming in from an external corporate entity. Hundreds of thousands of dollars were being quietly funneled into Jasmine's accounts every single quarter. I narrowed my eyes, my fingers flying across the digital keyboard to trace the exact origin of these massive wire transfers. Darius was stealing serious wealth, far more than he could ever generate on his own. Before I could execute the final search query to unmask the source of the funds, the heavy wooden floorboards in the hallway groaned loudly. Footsteps were approaching my bedroom door. They were too light and quick to be Darius. It was Jasmine. The sharp metallic click of the deadbolt sliding open echoed like a gunshot through the quiet room. Panic flared in my chest, but my specialized training instantly took over my physical reactions. I shoved the illuminated tablet deep under the thick duvet, sliding it carefully between my uninjured leg and the heavy mattress, so the glow would be completely hidden. I threw my head back against the velvet pillows, letting my jaw go slack and my eyes roll back slightly. I forced my breathing to become shallow, erratic, and ragged, mimicking the exact physical symptoms of a heavy narcotic haze. The door swung open, casting a long rectangular shadow across the carpet. Jasmine walked in holding a steaming mug of coffee for herself and a small plastic cup filled with tap water. She stood at the foot of the bed, her eyes scanning my face for any sign of lucidity. "Well, look at you," she muttered, taking a loud, obnoxious sip of her hot coffee. "Darius told me Trent gave you enough horse tranquilizer to knock out a professional athlete, but I really wanted to come up here and see it for myself." I let out a low, guttural moan, tossing my head weakly from side to side against the pillows. "Where is my baby?" I mumbled, slurring my words heavily so they were barely intelligible. "I need Amara. My leg is on fire." Jasmine rolled her eyes, her young face twisting into a mask of pure, unfiltered disgust. "Shut up, Nia," she snapped, stepping closer to the bed. "Amara is at school and you are staying right there in that bed. You look absolutely pathetic. I do not even know how Darius put up with you for 7 long years. You act like you are so strong and independent, but you cannot even handle a little physical pain without turning into a crying, pathetic mess." She set the small plastic cup of water on my wooden nightstand, intentionally placing it just out of my physical reach. She leaned over my broken body, her cheap vanilla perfume mixing sickeningly with the rich smell of the coffee. "You are going to sign those legal papers tomorrow," she whispered, her voice dropping into a vicious, menacing register. "You are going to give us this beautiful house, and you are going to walk away with absolutely nothing. If you try to fight us in court, Darius is going to take Amara away from you forever, and you will spend the rest of your miserable life locked in a padded psychiatric cell." I whimpered softly, squeezing my eyes shut, as if her cruel words were physically striking me. "Please," I slurred, letting a single tear slip down my cheek for added theatrical effect. "Just make the pain stop." Jasmine laughed, a cruel, highly satisfied sound that echoed off the high ceilings of my spacious bedroom. She turned on her heel and walked out, completely convinced that my spirit was entirely broken and my mind was lost to the heavy sedatives Trent had injected into me. The heavy wooden door slammed shut, and the deadbolt clicked back into place, sealing me inside my temporary prison once again. I waited until her light footsteps completely faded down the carpeted stairs before I dropped the helpless act. My face hardened instantly into a mask of pure determination. I wiped the fake tear from my cheek and reached back under the heavy duvet, pulling the warm tablet back into my lap. The screen was still glowing brightly, the complex financial tracking software patiently waiting for my next command. Jasmine thought she was so incredibly smart. She thought she was the beautiful young victor claiming the spoils of a defeated older woman. She had absolutely no idea that her name was currently sitting at the very center of a massive federal wire fraud investigation. Her arrogant little visit had not broken me. It had just given me all the motivation I needed to ensure she spent the best years of her youth wearing a federal prison uniform. I turned my complete attention back to the massive deposits flowing into her dummy corporation. I initiated a highly illegal reverse trace on the external routing numbers, slicing straight through the superficial privacy shields the originating bank had in place. The green progress bar loaded slowly across the screen, each percentage point bringing me closer to the true source of my husband's stolen wealth. Darius was a mid-level corporate employee. He did not have access to this kind of liquid capital on his own. He was stealing it from somewhere, and I was about to find out exactly where. The screen flashed bright green, illuminating my face in the dark room. The trace was complete. The originating bank account details populated the screen, revealing the official registered name of the corporate entity that was secretly funding Jasmine's luxury lifestyle. I stared at the bold black letters on the glowing screen, my breath catching sharply in my throat. The puzzle pieces finally snapped together in a horrifying, brilliant picture of absolute betrayal, and I suddenly realized that the criminals in my house were actively robbing each other. The tablet screen flashed a brilliant emerald green in the suffocating darkness of my master bedroom. The final decryption sequence had finished running. The official registered name of the corporate entity secretly funding Jasmine and her luxury lifestyle populated the center of the screen. I blinked several times, leaning closer to the glowing display, completely convinced that the heavy narcotic sedative Trent had injected into my arm was causing me to hallucinate. But the bold black letters remained completely unchanged. I have audited hundreds of massive corporate conglomerates and exposed some of the most ruthless embezzlers in the country, but I have never witnessed a scenario this profoundly ironic. The corporation being systematically drained of its capital was not some faceless banking institution. It was Vance Orthopedic and Sports Medicine. It was Trent's private medical clinic. Trent, the incredibly arrogant, wealthy white surgeon who had stood in my kitchen just 24 hours ago, pumping my veins full of unauthorized tranquilizers and spewing the most vile racist rhetoric about black women. He had used his prestigious medical license to fabricate a psychiatric emergency intentionally weaponizing his racial and professional privilege to protect my abuser. Trent walked around our family gatherings with his chest puffed out constantly, bragging about his superior intellect and his elite social standing, looking down his nose at absolutely everyone else. And he had absolutely no idea that the very brother-in-law he was risking his entire medical career to protect was actively operating as a massive lethal parasite, sucking the financial lifeblood out of his beloved private practice. I pulled the heavy duvet up slightly higher to shield the blue glow of the screen and let my fingers fly across the digital keyboard. I needed to document exactly how Darius had managed to pull off such a massive heist right under the nose of a highly educated surgeon. As I dug deeper into the billing logs and the vendor payment histories, the architecture of the fraud became incredibly clear. 2 years ago, Trent had proudly announced at a family Thanksgiving dinner that he was bringing Darius on as an external financial consultant to handle the clinic's third-party insurance billing. Trent had boasted about keeping wealth strictly within the family network and giving Darius an opportunity to handle real money. Trent had handed Darius the keys to the kingdom, giving him completely unfettered access to the clinic's operational accounts without ever hiring an independent auditor to verify the outgoing cash flow. It was a fatal display of pure arrogance. Darius was not a financial genius by any stretch of the imagination, but he was highly opportunistic. I watched the digital evidence unfold on my screen, easily deconstructing his sloppy methodology. Darius had established a network of phantom medical supply companies. He used Jasmine's maiden name and her stolen social security details to register these fake vendors. Then, he simply began generating highly sophisticated fraudulent invoices for surgical equipment, specialized orthopedic hardware, and post-operative medications that were never actually ordered or delivered to the clinic. He inflated the costs of routine medical supplies by 300%, processing the payments through the clinic's accounting software and routing the massive overages directly into Jasmine's corporate shell accounts. He was smart enough not to drain the accounts all at once. He structured the theft into hundreds of smaller steady wire transfers that flew completely under the radar of the standard banking alerts. I scrolled down to the absolute bottom of the digital ledger and looked at the cumulative total, $2.5 million. Over the span of just under 30 months, Darius had successfully embezzled $2.5 million from Trent's private business. That massive fortune was the true source of Jasmine's high-end luxury apartment, her expensive designer bags, and the sleek sports car parked in her driveway. Meanwhile, I knew from Keisha's constant complaining that Trent had recently been forced to take out a massive secondary business loan just to keep his clinic doors open, completely baffled as to why his highly successful practice was suddenly bleeding cash. The sheer poetry of this situation made me want to laugh out loud, but I bit the inside of my cheek to remain perfectly silent. Trent had eagerly conspired with a violent abuser to destroy my life, steal my child, and strip me of my assets completely, believing he was doing a favor for a poor, beleaguered husband trapped with an unstable black wife. If Trent only knew that the cashmere sweater he was wearing and the luxury sports car he was driving were actively being heavily mortgaged, so Darius could buy expensive jewelry for a 24-year-old intern, the arrogant surgeon would likely suffer a massive cardiac arrest. The villains in this story were literally cannibalizing each other. Their entire alliance was built on a fragile, rotting foundation of profound deception, racial prejudice, and unchecked greed. It was a powder keg just waiting for a single spark. This financial bombshell was the ultimate weapon I needed. The fabricated medical chart Trent had written last night claiming I had suffered a violent manic episode was now completely worthless. When I handed this evidence over to the federal authorities, I could easily prove that Trent was financially compromised and fundamentally linked to a multi-million-dollar wire fraud conspiracy. A defense attorney could never use that medical file against me once a judge saw that the doctor who wrote it was the primary victim of the husband's massive embezzlement scheme. The conflict of interest was staggering. And then the final, most sickening piece of Darius's master plan suddenly clicked into place. I looked at the routing numbers for the shell company debt that Darius was planning to force me to sign for tomorrow. He wanted me to legally assume the liability for Jasmine's dummy corporation. If I signed those divorce and asset transfer papers, I would become legally responsible for the $2.5 million he had stolen from Trent. Darius was planning to frame me for the entire embezzlement scheme. He would walk away completely clean, keeping the cash he had already laundered, and leaving me to face the federal indictments and the financial ruin when Trent inevitably discovered the missing funds. He truly thought I was just a blind, desperate woman lying in a bed waiting to be slaughtered. I quickly initiated a mass-secured download transferring every single fraudulent invoice, every fake vendor profile, and the complete web of transaction histories into a highly encrypted secondary folder on my flash drive. I needed to ensure that this evidence was perfectly preserved and completely undeniable. Once the download progress bar hit 100%, I powered down the undercover tablet and slid it back into its hidden pouch behind the headboard of my bed. The dull, heavy throbbing in my fractured leg returned with a vengeance, but the physical pain was completely overshadowed by the intense burning adrenaline surging through my veins. Every time I thought about my beautiful daughter Amara hiding under that dining table, terrified and clutching her teddy bear, my resolve hardened into absolute steel. I was not just fighting for my dignity anymore. I was fighting to protect my child from a family of absolute monsters. I remembered the look of sheer, unadulterated triumph on Keisha's face as she walked out of my bedroom wearing my grandmother's vintage gold bangle. I remembered Jasmine's cruel, mocking laughter as she placed that sterile plastic bedpan on my lap. I remembered Trent's cold, clinical voice as he plunged the needle into my arm, and I remembered the dead, soulless look in Darius's eyes as he snapped my bone against the kitchen cabinet. They all believed they had successfully cornered me. They believed that by isolating me, locking me in a dark room, and threatening my relationship with my daughter, I would simply fold and surrender my entire life to them. But my father, the Honorable Judge Elias Sterling, had taught me better than that. We did not need to hunt these criminals down one by one. We just needed to let them gather in my living room tomorrow evening for Darius's grand birthday celebration. We needed to let them drink my expensive champagne, laugh at my supposed defeat, and present me with those fraudulent legal documents. They wanted to stage a dramatic transfer of power, and I was going to give them exactly the show they demanded. But when the curtain finally dropped, I would be the only one left standing. I closed my eyes, letting a slow, cold smile spread across my face in the darkness. Let them sleep well tonight. It would be the absolute last night of peace any of them would ever experience. The morning sunlight was aggressively bright when it finally pierced through the gaps in the bedroom blinds. I woke up to the muffled sounds of intense activity echoing from the first floor. It was Saturday. Today was the day of Darius's grand birthday celebration. Even through the heavy wooden door, I could hear Jasmine barking orders at a catering crew that had just arrived. She was eagerly playing the role of the wealthy lady of the house, preparing to host the very family members who were actively conspiring to destroy me. My leg throbbed with a dull, heavy rhythm, a constant physical reminder of the violence I had endured, but my mind was incredibly sharp and entirely focused on the mission ahead. Around noon, the heavy deadbolt on my bedroom door clicked open. Darius walked into the room. He was freshly showered, smelling of his expensive designer cologne, and wearing a sharply tailored navy blue suit that I had bought for him 2 Christmases ago. He looked like the perfect, respectable corporate gentleman. No one looking at him would ever suspect that he was a violent abuser and a multi-million-dollar embezzler. He closed the door quietly behind him and stood at the foot of my bed. He was holding a sleek black leather folder. His face was devoid of the fake sympathy he had shown the police yesterday. Today, it was just pure, unadulterated malice. "I hope you have had enough time to think about your situation, Nia," he said, his voice smooth and dangerously calm. He opened the leather folder and pulled out a thick stack of legal documents. They were different from the divorce papers he had thrown at me the night he broke my leg. These documents had heavy red legal seals at the top. He tossed them onto the mattress right next to my cast. I looked down at the bold print on the first page. It was a durable power of attorney for both healthcare and finances. My eyes scanned the dense legal paragraphs. This document was designed to grant Darius absolute control over every single aspect of my life. It would give him the legal authority to manage my bank accounts, sell my assets, sign contracts on my behalf, and make every medical decision regarding my physical and mental health. "What is this?" I asked, forcing my voice to tremble slightly. I pulled my shoulders inward deliberately, shrinking myself against the pillows to give him the visual submission he desperately craved. "I thought you just wanted me to sign the divorce papers and the house deed." "Plans change," Darius replied easily, pacing slowly across the room. "You see, Nia, a divorce takes time. It requires court dates, mediation, and a lot of unnecessary legal scrutiny. I do not have time for that. I am taking over the management of this household immediately. When you sign that power of attorney, you are legally acknowledging that your mental state is rapidly deteriorating and that you are voluntarily surrendering the management of your affairs to your husband. It makes everything incredibly clean and efficient." I stared at him, letting a look of complete horror wash over my face. "You want me to give you total legal control over my life?" I whispered, my voice cracking perfectly on the last word. "I will not sign that. You have no right to ask me to do this." Darius stopped pacing. He leaned over the bed, placing his large hands firmly on the mattress on either side of my legs, trapping me in his shadow. "I am not asking you, Nia," he said, his voice dropping to a menacing whisper. "I am telling you exactly how this is going to happen. You have two choices today. Choice one is that you sign these documents tonight in front of my attorney. You give me the house, you take the debt from Jasmine's company, and you walk away quietly. If you do that, I will let you keep your freedom. I will let you rent a cheap apartment somewhere, and you can start your life over." He paused, letting his cruel offer hang in the quiet room before delivering his ultimate threat. "Choice two is that you refuse to sign. If you refuse, I am going to make a phone call to my good friend Trent. Trent will gladly take the medical chart he fabricated the other night, the one stating you suffered a violent manic episode, and he will submit it to a family court judge. I will testify that you are a severe danger to yourself and to our child. With Trent's medical backing and my testimony, the judge will grant me an emergency involuntary psychiatric hold." A cold chill genuinely ran down my spine, not from fear of his threat, because I already knew my father had neutralized it, but from the sheer calculated evil of his plan. He was actively describing how he was going to weaponize the legal and medical systems to permanently erase me. "Once you are locked inside a psychiatric ward," Darius continued, a sick smile spreading across his face, "I will file for an emergency conservatorship. I will get control of your assets anyway, but the best part is what happens to Amara. The family court will grant me full exclusive legal and physical custody. You will be declared an unfit mother. You will lose your parental rights entirely. I will raise Amara with Jasmine. We will teach her that her biological mother went completely crazy and abandoned her. You will never see your daughter again for the rest of your life." The mention of my daughter was the trigger I needed to complete my performance. I let out a sharp, ragged gasp. I squeezed my eyes shut, and tears finally spilled over my eyelashes, rolling hotly down my cheeks. "Please, Darius," I sobbed, clutching the edge of the heavy duvet. "Please do not do this. Please do not take Amara away from me. I will do whatever you want. Just please let me keep my baby." Darius stood up straight, brushing a piece of invisible lint off his tailored suit jacket. He looked down at my weeping form with an expression of absolute intoxicating power. He was feeding on my fabricated despair, completely addicted to the feeling of having totally broken a strong, successful woman. "That is exactly what I thought," he said smugly. "You are finally starting to understand your place in all of this." He checked the expensive gold watch on his wrist. "My attorney is arriving at 7 o'clock tonight for the birthday dinner. He will have his notary stamp with him. You are going to get yourself cleaned up. Jasmine will bring you a dress. We are going to bring you downstairs in a wheelchair, and you are going to sit at the dining table with my family. You will smile, you will act like a supportive wife who is tragically recovering from a terrible accident, and you will sign every single page of that document exactly where the lawyer tells you to." He turned and walked toward the bedroom door, his hand resting on the brass knob. "If you cause a scene, Nia, or if you refuse to sign, I will have the paramedics here before the cake is even cut, and you will sleep in a padded room tonight. Do you understand me?" I nodded weakly, keeping my head bowed so he could not see the sudden dangerous clarity in my eyes. "I understand," I whispered. "Good," he said. "Happy birthday to me." He stepped out into the hallway and pulled the door shut. The deadbolt clicked, locking me in once again. As soon as the sound of his footsteps faded down the stairs, I stopped crying immediately. I wiped the tears from my face with the back of my hand. My heart was beating with a steady, powerful rhythm. Darius had just handed me the final critical piece of the puzzle. By bringing his attorney and a notary to the house to officially witness a coerced signature, he was elevating his crime from a simple domestic dispute to a documented, undeniable act of federal extortion and wire fraud. He was walking right into the trap my father had meticulously set. I looked at the legal documents resting on my bed. I was going to sign a paper tonight, but it was certainly not going to be the one Darius brought me. I waited until the sound of his footsteps completely disappeared into the commotion of the first floor before I reached up to the thick braid at the nape of my neck. I pressed the concealed pressure pad, activating the microscopic earpiece. "Dad," I whispered into the quiet room. "Are you there?" "I am here." "Nia." My father's voice crackled softly in my ear, steady and commanding. "Tell me exactly what just happened." He brought the paperwork. I explained, keeping my voice low. "It is a durable power of attorney for both healthcare and finances. He is throwing his birthday dinner tonight at 7 o'clock. He is bringing his personal attorney and a licensed notary to the house to officially witness my signature. He threatened that if I refuse to sign over total control of my assets and medical decisions, he will use Trent's fake medical chart to have me involuntarily committed to a psychiatric ward tonight and permanently terminate my parental rights to Amara." A brief, heavy silence fell over the encrypted line. When my father finally spoke, his voice was chillingly calm. "He is bringing a licensed attorney and a notary public across state lines to officially witness the coerced signature of an extorted asset transfer. He just handed us the exact federal conspiracy and wire fraud trigger we needed. This is no longer just a domestic matter, Nia. This is a highly organized multi-million-dollar federal crime, and he is about to document it himself." "What is our move?" I asked, looking at the black leather folder Darius had carelessly tossed onto my bed. "We let him have his signing ceremony," my father said. "But he is not going to get the document he brought you. My legal team at the federal building has been working all morning. They have drafted a replacement document. From a visual standpoint, it is an absolute masterpiece. It uses the exact same premium legal paper, the same standard margins, the same font, and the exact same red notary seals as a standard Georgia power of attorney form. It looks identical to the papers sitting on your bed right now." "What does the text actually say?" I asked, a spark of anticipation cutting through the pain in my leg. "It is a confession of judgment and a voluntary restitution agreement," my father explained smoothly. "By signing the bottom of that page, Darius will be legally confessing to the systematic embezzlement of $2.5 million from Vance Orthopedic and Sports Medicine. He will be legally acknowledging that the shell company registered to Jasmine is a fraudulent entity. And most importantly, he will be signing a legally binding agreement to surrender all of his personal assets, including his equity in your shared home, to repay the stolen funds. When his own lawyer notarizes that signature, the trap permanently snaps shut. Darius will be signing his own financial death warrant." It was brilliant. It was the ultimate forensic accounting trap executed through the flawless legal precision of a federal judge. But a massive logistical problem remained. "How do we get the fake documents into a locked bedroom?" I asked. "I cannot walk, and Darius has the only key to the deadbolt." Amara is on her way home from school right now, my father said, his tone softening slightly at the mention of his granddaughter. One of my undercover agents intercepted her school bus route. She is posing as a substitute crossing guard at the entrance to your affluent neighborhood. She slipped a flat sealed envelope into the secret back zipper compartment of Amara's backpack. Amara is a very smart little girl, Nia. We told her it was a secret game to help mommy. When she gets home, she will come straight to your door. I disconnected the transmission and stared at the gap between the bottom of my heavy bedroom door and the hardwood floor. It was barely half an inch wide. It was going to be a tight squeeze, but it was the only way. 20 minutes later, I heard the heavy rumble of the school bus pulling away from the cul-de-sac. The front door of the house opened and closed. I heard Jasmine's voice shrill and annoyed from the kitchen, telling Amara to take off her dirty shoes and go straight upstairs to wash her hands, because the caterers were busy setting up the dining room. Jasmine was entirely too focused on pretending to be a wealthy socialite to pay any attention to a 5-year-old child. Light, rapid footsteps hurried up the carpeted stairs. They did not go to the bathroom. They came straight down the hallway and stopped right outside my locked bedroom door. Mommy Amara's tiny voice whispered through the thick wood. "Are you in there?" "I am here, baby," I whispered back, fighting through the sharp pain as I dragged my upper body toward the edge of the mattress. "Mommy is right here. Do you have the secret envelope from Grandpa?" "Yes," she whispered back proudly. "I am sliding it now." I watched as a thin, crisp manila envelope was pushed slowly through the narrow gap underneath the door. It scraped against the hardwood, catching slightly before sliding all the way into the room. "Thank you, my sweet girl," I said softly. "Now go to your room, put on your pretty dress for the party tonight, and remember exactly what we practiced. Stay quiet and stay safe. I love you so much." "I love you too, Mommy," she whispered, and I heard her little footsteps running safely away down the hall. I took a deep breath, steeling myself against the agonizing pain radiating from my shattered bone. I had to reach the floor. I gripped the heavy wooden bedpost with both hands, slowly lowering my upper body down over the side of the mattress. Gravity pulled at the heavy fiberglass cast on my leg, sending blinding white flashes of agony directly into my brain. Sweat broke out across my forehead, and I bit down hard on my lower lip to prevent myself from screaming. I stretched my arm out as far as it could possibly go, my fingertips brushing the smooth paper of the envelope. With one final, agonizing push, I grabbed it and hauled myself back up onto the pillows, gasping for air. My hands trembled slightly as I ripped open the seal and pulled out the legal documents. My father was absolutely right. The forgery was a breathtaking work of art. The crisp, heavy paper bore the exact same state seals and the identical Gothic font at the header. To a casual observer or a narcissistic husband riding the high of his own perceived victory, it looked exactly like the durable power of attorney he had handed me an hour ago. I opened the black leather folder Darius had left on my bed. I carefully removed his original documents, folded them tightly, and shoved them deep underneath my mattress right next to my hidden tablet and my flash drive. Then I placed the federal trap documents neatly into the leather folder, ensuring the edges were perfectly aligned. I ran my fingers over the signature line at the bottom of the final page. Tonight Darius was going to stand in my dining room surrounded by his complicit sister, his arrogant white brother-in-law, and his pathetic young mistress. He was going to forcefully present this document to the room, completely convinced that he was cementing his ultimate triumph over my life. He was going to sign his name in bold black ink, officially stealing a mountain of debt he thought he was passing on to me. I closed the black leather folder and rested my hands on top of it. The trap was set. The bait was in place. Now all I had to do was put on the dress Jasmine had picked out for me, sit in my wheelchair, and play the role of the broken, defeated wife one last time. Let the birthday celebration begin. Exactly at 6:30, the heavy deadbolt on my bedroom door clicked open one final time. Jasmine strutted into the room holding a shapeless, faded gray cotton dress on a wire hanger. It was a garment I kept shoved in the very back of my closet for painting or deep cleaning the house. She had clearly chosen it with the specific intention of making me look as sick, pathetic, and unappealing as humanly possible. I did not fight her on the wardrobe choice. Looking like a broken, defeated woman was the entire point of my performance tonight. I allowed her to roughly help me pull the dress over my head, wincing genuinely as the fabric dragged against my bruised shoulders. A few minutes later, Darius entered pushing a heavy-duty medical wheelchair he had rented. His eyes immediately darted to the black leather folder resting securely on my lap. He gave a satisfied, arrogant smirk, completely assuming I was obediently holding his fabricated legal documents and his ticket to total financial freedom. He lifted me from the bed with zero gentleness, dropping me into the wheelchair. Every single jolt sent a fresh wave of blinding pain shooting up my shattered leg, but I kept my face downturned perfectly, playing the part of a woman whose spirit had been entirely crushed. He wheeled me out of the bedroom and carefully navigated the motorized chairlift we had installed years ago for my elderly grandmother. We reached the bottom of the stairs, and the transformation of my home was instantly nauseating. The dining room table was covered in an expensive white silk runner, overflowing with catered lobster tails, roasted prime rib, and bottles of vintage champagne that I had personally purchased for our anniversary months ago. Soft jazz played from the surround sound speakers. The warm lighting from the crystal chandeliers made the room glow. It looked exactly like a beautiful, wealthy celebration of life, but the air in the room was thick with a suffocating, toxic hypocrisy. The guest list was a perfectly curated collection of predators. Keisha was lounging on my custom Italian leather sofa, sipping a large glass of champagne. She was wearing my grandmother's vintage gold bangle and had my limited edition oxblood Telfar bag resting conspicuously beside her feet on the rug. She did not even have the basic decency to look ashamed or hide the stolen goods when I was wheeled into the room. Instead, she raised her crystal glass toward me in a mocking silent toast, her lips curled into a nasty, victorious smile. Next to her stood Trent. The arrogant white orthopedic surgeon was dressed in a pristine charcoal bespoke suit, gently swirling a glass of expensive scotch. He looked me up and down with a clinical, highly detached expression, as if I were a diseased laboratory specimen rather than his sister-in-law. He leaned over and whispered something into Keisha's ear, prompting her to let out a sharp, cruel laugh. Trent was completely comfortable in his perceived racial and professional superiority, oblivious to the massive financial bomb sitting quietly on my lap. He was standing in my living room acting like a king, while completely unaware that his own medical empire was currently funding the catered lobster he was about to eat. Jasmine immediately abandoned her conversation with the catering staff to rush over and wrap her arms possessively around Darius. She was wearing a stunning form-fitting emerald green silk dress that I instantly recognized. It was a custom-tailored piece I had purchased for a corporate gala last year. She had raided my closet yet again, parading my hard-earned success around as her own personal costume. I glanced quickly toward the stairs, noting the absolute silence from the second floor. Jasmine had banished Amara to her bedroom for the entire evening, ordering her not to ruin the adult party. It was the only smart thing Jasmine had done all week. I needed Amara completely out of the crossfire for what was about to happen. And then there was the final critical piece of this corrupt puzzle. Standing near the marble fireplace was a man I did not recognize. He wore a cheap, wrinkled brown suit and had the nervous, shifty energy of a rat caught in a spotlight. He clutched a heavy briefcase to his chest, his eyes darting anxiously around the opulent room. Darius wheeled me directly toward the center of the living room, positioning my wheelchair so I was surrounded by everyone. He cleared his throat loudly to get the room's attention. "Thank you all for coming tonight," Darius announced, his voice booming with fake warmth and deep masculine authority. "As you all know, it has been a highly challenging week for our family. Nia suffered a terrible tragic accident, and her mental health has unfortunately been rapidly deteriorating. But tonight is about moving forward. Tonight is about making the hard, necessary decisions to protect the future of this household and ensure that everything remains secure." He gestured toward the nervous man standing by the fireplace. This is Mr. Caldwell. He is my personal attorney and a state-licensed notary public. He has graciously agreed to join us tonight to officially witness the transition of my wife's estate management into my legal care. It is an absolute tragedy that she is no longer capable of handling her own complex financial affairs, but as her devoted husband, it is my absolute duty to step in and take on this heavy burden for the sake of our family. The sheer breathtaking audacity of his speech made my stomach physically turn. He was standing in the very house I paid for, surrounded by the assets I earned preparing to steal millions of dollars while pretending to be a noble, selfless savior. Trent nodded approvingly, raising his scotch glass in solidarity. "It is the right thing to do," Darius Trent said, in his smooth, condescending tone, projecting his voice so everyone could hear his expert medical opinion. "You are doing what is best for her safety. Some women simply cannot handle the immense pressure of modern corporate life. Their minds simply break under the heavy weight of their own unnatural ambitions. You are a good man for taking over and protecting her from herself." Keisha chimed in eagerly, adjusting my stolen gold bangle on her wrist. "Exactly. It is about time the man of the house took his rightful place at the head of the table. We all support you, Darius. We are family, and family always protects its own." I sat in the center of the room, surrounded by this circle of vultures. The black leather folder felt incredibly heavy on my lap. I kept my head slightly bowed, letting my long braids fall forward to hide the intense predatory focus sharpening in my eyes. They were all playing their parts perfectly, wrapping their greed, their racism, and their brutal betrayal in the deceptive language of love and medical concern. They truly thought I was the main course at their twisted feast. Mr. Caldwell stepped forward, pulling a thick gold pen from his breast pocket and placing his heavy metal notary stamp directly onto the glass coffee table in front of my wheelchair. He did not look me in the eye. He knew exactly what he was participating in. He was an unethical lawyer actively facilitating the financial extortion of a medically incapacitated woman. "Are we ready to proceed with the signatures?" Mr. Caldwell asked, his voice reedy and thin, sweating slightly under the bright chandelier lights. Darius stepped directly behind my wheelchair, placing his large, heavy hands on my bruised shoulders in a false show of husbandly comfort. His grip was painfully tight, a silent physical threat warning me not to step out of line or cause a scene. "We are absolutely ready, Caldwell," Darius said, squeezing my collarbone. "Let us get this over with so we can all enjoy dinner." The entire room fell completely silent. The trap was perfectly assembled. Every single conspirator was present, willingly participating in the federal crime my father had meticulously orchestrated. I slowly lifted my head, my hands gripping the edges of the black leather folder. The show was finally about to begin. Before I could even unfold the leather cover resting on my lap, Trent decided he needed one final moment of absolute authority. He was not satisfied with simply being a silent accomplice to this massive financial extortion. His massive ego required him to be the featured savior of the evening. He set his expensive crystal glass of scotch down on the dining table and slowly walked over to my wheelchair. The heavy thud of his designer leather shoes against the hardwood floor sounded like a judge's gavel calling a corrupt courtroom to order. Darius stepped aside slightly, allowing his wealthy white brother-in-law to take the primary position of intimidation. Trent leaned down, placing his large hand heavily onto my left shoulder. It was not a gesture of comfort. It was a physical manifestation of ownership and control. He squeezed the bruised muscle right near my collarbone, pressing down just hard enough to send a sharp, warning ache radiating down my arm. "Look at me," Nia Trent commanded, his voice, dropping into that smooth, practiced clinical register he used to deliver bad news to patients. I kept my head down for a fraction of a second longer than necessary, playing the role of the terrified subordinate, before slowly raising my eyes to meet his cold blue gaze. "You need to understand the absolute magnitude of the favor I am doing for you tonight," Trent said, leaning in closer so I could smell the sharp alcohol on his breath. If I had not driven over here the other night to personally intervene, Darius would have been legally obligated to call 911. Do you have any idea what happens to an unstable, highly aggressive black woman when the city paramedics and the local police arrive on the scene of a domestic disturbance? They do not treat you with the delicate care and discretion that I provided. They do not put you in a comfortable bed in $1 million home. He paused, letting his cruel, hypothetical scenario hang heavily in the air. Keisha nodded in the background, humming her absolute agreement. They would have strapped you to a cheap metal gurney. Trent continued, his voice dripping with condescension. They would have dragged you out of this beautiful house in front of all your affluent neighbors and thrown you into the back of a freezing ambulance. You would have been locked inside the psychiatric ward of a crowded, underfunded public county hospital. You would be sitting in a sterile room right now, wearing a paper gown, heavily medicated on cheap generic tranquilizers, and completely stripped of your dignity. I saved you from that nightmare, Nia. I used my pristine professional reputation to completely shield you from the brutal reality of the public health system. I forced my lower lip to tremble violently. I brought my hands up from the leather folder and wrapped my arms around my own waist, shivering as if the mere thought of a public hospital ward terrified me to my very core. I let a single ragged sob escape my throat. "There is no need for crying now," Jasmine chimed in from across the room, rolling her eyes dramatically. "Just listen to the doctor and do what you are told. It is not that complicated." Trent held up a hand, silencing Jasmine without even looking at her. His focus remained entirely fixed on breaking me. "You see, Nia, the problem with women like you is that you get a little bit of corporate success and you completely forget your natural boundaries. You started making decent money, and you thought you could run this entire household. You tried to control a strong man like Darius. But the human mind is fragile, and your unnatural ambition finally shattered your psychological stability. You had a violent manic break. It is a textbook psychological collapse. But because you are family, I officially vouched for you. I put my medical license on the line to sign a sworn affidavit confirming your mental incompetence so that Darius can quietly manage your affairs without the state getting involved." He patted my shoulder twice, a condescending gesture usually reserved for a disobedient dog that had finally been brought to heel. "So I want you to look at those papers in your lap. I want you to pick up that gold pen, and I want you to sign your name on the dotted line. You should be down on your knees thanking us for giving you such a quiet, graceful exit. Do not make me regret my medical generosity, Nia. Because if you refuse to sign my affidavit, go straight to a family court judge tomorrow morning, and you will never see your daughter Amara again." The silence that followed his speech was absolute. The sheer volume of racial microaggressions, medical malpractice, and blatant extortion he had just casually delivered in front of a licensed attorney was staggering. Trent had just verbally confessed to fabricating a medical document to facilitate the theft of my assets, and he felt completely invincible doing it. He thought his white coat and his skin color provided an impenetrable shield against any legal consequences. I knew my father and the federal agents sitting in the surveillance vans down the street were recording every single syllable of his arrogant monologue. Trent had just gift-wrapped his own federal indictment. I looked up at him, my eyes wide and perfectly welling with fresh tears. "I understand, Trent," I whispered, my voice barely a broken rasp. "I am sorry. I am so sorry for causing all of this trouble. Thank you for protecting me from the hospital. I will sign whatever Darius wants." Trent smiled, a cold, satisfied stretching of his lips. He finally removed his heavy hand from my shoulder and took a step back, crossing his arms over his expensive suit. "Good girl," Trent said smoothly. "Proceed, Mr. Caldwell." The nervous attorney practically lunged forward, picking up the heavy gold pen from the glass coffee table and holding it out toward me. "Please open the folder to the final page," Mrs. Sterling Caldwell instructed, his voice shaking slightly. "There are 3 tabs marked with red arrows. I need your full legal signature next to each arrow." I slowly reached out with a trembling hand and took the gold pen from the lawyer. My fingers brushed against the smooth, cool metal. I took a deep, shaky breath and pulled the black leather cover open. The documents my father had provided rested perfectly inside. The state seals gleamed under the chandelier light. The heading looked exactly like a standard power of attorney form. Darius leaned over my wheelchair, his face just inches from my ear. His breathing was heavy with anticipation. He was practically vibrating with the thrill of his impending victory. "Sign it," Darius hissed into my ear. "Do it right now." I stared down at the crisp white paper. My trembling completely stopped. The facade of the broken weeping wife instantly vanished, evaporating into the warm air of the dining room. My spine straightened against the back of the medical wheelchair. I gripped the gold pen firmly between my fingers. I did not sign the paper. Instead, I reached down, grasped the top edge of the thick legal document, and calmly flipped it entirely over so the text was facing upside down toward Darius. "Read the first paragraph," Darius the First said. My voice was no longer a broken whisper. It was cold, sharp, and carried the absolute, unyielding authority of a woman who was about to burn the entire room to the ground. Darius froze. The sudden drastic shift in my tone caught him completely off guard. He blinked, staring down at the upside-down document. "What are you playing at, Nia?" he demanded, his voice losing a fraction of its confident swagger. "Stop wasting time and sign the damn paper." I said, "Read the first paragraph," I repeated, leaning back in my chair and crossing my arms over my chest. "Or are you too busy stealing millions of dollars from your brother-in-law to comprehend basic legal terminology?" The atmosphere in the room shattered instantly. Trent dropped his arms. Keisha stopped adjusting her bracelet. Jasmine took a step back from the table, and Darius slowly leaned down, his eyes scanning the first few lines of the document I had just flipped toward him. The color drained completely from his face, leaving him looking like a terrified ghost. The birthday celebration was officially over. The execution had just begun. Darius stared at the upside-down document for a brief second. His eyes scanned the dense legal text, but his supreme arrogance completely blinded him to the actual words printed on the page. In his mind, I was just a desperate, defeated woman trying to stall the inevitable by pointing out some irrelevant typo or standard legal clause. He let out a harsh, dismissive scoff and snatched the top of the paper, flipping it right back over to the final signature page. "I do not have time for your pathetic little games," Nia, Darius growled, tapping his manicured index finger aggressively next to the red arrow, indicating where I needed to sign. "You are not auditing a corporate merger right now. You are signing your life over to me. Do it before Trent calls the hospital and has them bring the straitjacket." The entire room watched me with bated breath. I had given him the chance to read the trap he was about to step into, and he had flatly refused. His own impatience had sealed his fate. I let my shoulders slump forward, completely dropping the momentary flash of defiance. I picked up the heavy gold pen from my lap. My hand trembled with perfectly calculated hesitation. I pressed the tip of the pen against the crisp white paper and slowly, deliberately signed my full legal name on the 3 designated lines. The second the ink dried on the final signature, Darius practically ripped the black leather folder off my lap. A massive, genuine smile broke across his handsome face, completely transforming his features from menacing to euphoric. He turned immediately to Mr. Caldwell, who was already holding his heavy metal notary stamp. "Make it official," Caldwell, Darius ordered, practically vibrating with excitement. The corrupt attorney quickly reviewed my signatures, nodded in satisfaction, and pressed his metal stamp firmly onto the bottom of each page. The loud, solid thud of the stamp hitting the glass coffee table echoed through the quiet living room. It was the sound of a federal crime being legally cemented and fully documented. Darius let out a loud, triumphant laugh that bounced off the crystal chandeliers. He grabbed Jasmine by the waist and pulled her into a deep, passionate kiss right in front of my wheelchair. Jasmine squealed with delight, wrapping her arms around his neck. "We did it, baby," she cheered loudly, completely ignoring my presence. "We finally got the house." "Not just the house," Keisha shouted, jumping up from the Italian leather sofa. She grabbed a heavy green bottle of my most expensive vintage champagne from the ice bucket on the dining table. "We got the whole damn kingdom." She popped the cork with a loud, festive bang that made me flinch. The champagne bubbled over the rim, spilling onto the pristine white silk runner, but nobody cared. They were too busy celebrating the successful execution of their hostile takeover. Trent walked over to the dining table, holding out his empty crystal Scotch glass to be filled with the expensive champagne. A toast, the arrogant white surgeon announced, raising his freshly poured drink into the air. To the restoration of the natural order. Darius, you handled a very messy situation with absolute precision. You cut the dead weight out of your life and secured your future. Cheers to the new management. Cheers, the group yelled in unison, clinking their glasses together. They began loudly discussing their immediate plans for my home and my assets. Jasmine excitedly talked about ripping out my custom kitchen cabinets to install modern marble. Keisha demanded that my walk-in closet be converted into a guest room for her exclusive use. Darius simply stood at the head of the table, sipping his champagne and basking in the absolute glory of his perceived genius. He thought he was the smartest man in Atlanta. He thought he had outmaneuvered a seasoned forensic accountant and stripped me of every single dollar I had ever earned. I sat quietly in my rented medical wheelchair, the empty gold pen still resting loosely in my fingers. I watched them drink my champagne and laugh at my expense. The adrenaline pumping through my veins was so intense I could barely feel the throbbing pain in my shattered leg anymore. I was simply waiting for the grand finale. They never even got the chance to take their second sip. A sudden deafening series of heavy physical blows struck the solid oak front door. The pounding was so violently loud and aggressive that the crystal glasses actually rattled on the dining room table. The celebration froze instantly. Jasmine gasped, spilling her champagne down the front of her emerald green silk dress. Trent lowered his glass, his arrogant smile vanishing into a tight line of confusion. Federal Bureau of Investigation. Open the door immediately. The voice booming from the other side of the heavy wood was amplified by a megaphone. It was incredibly deep, entirely devoid of patience, and carried the unmistakable weight of absolute federal authority. "What the hell is that?" Keisha panicked, dropping her glass onto the rug. "Darius, why are the cops here?" "It is just the local police," Darius said quickly, though his voice wavered slightly. One of the neighbors probably heard the champagne pop and called in another noise complaint. "Just stay calm, everyone. Let me handle this. I have the medical file and the legal paperwork. We are completely bulletproof." Darius confidently adjusted his suit jacket, picked up the black leather folder containing the freshly notarized documents and marched toward the foyer. But he did not even get the chance to turn the brass deadbolt. A heavy tactical battering ram smashed into the center of the oak door, splintering the reinforced wood and blowing the lock completely out of its metal frame. The door slammed open with a terrifying crash, hitting the interior wall so hard that a framed painting fell to the floor and shattered. Over a dozen heavily armed federal agents wearing black tactical windbreakers with bright yellow lettering across their backs flooded into my foyer. They moved with terrifying speed and precision, fanning out across the first floor and immediately securing the perimeter. "Nobody move. Keep your hands where we can see them," the lead tactical agent barked, pointing his weapon downward but maintaining absolute control of the room. Darius stumbled backward, dropping the leather folder onto the floor. His hands shot up into the air, his face entirely drained of color. Jasmine shrieked and hid behind the dining table. "Mr. Caldwell." The corrupt attorney immediately dropped to his knees and laced his fingers behind his head, looking like he was about to suffer a massive heart attack. The sea of black tactical jackets parted down the middle, creating a clear pathway from the shattered front door straight into my living room. Walking slowly and deliberately down that pathway was a tall, impeccably dressed African-American man leaning slightly on a custom-polished wooden cane. He wore a sharp-tailored charcoal overcoat and a classic fedora. He took his hat off as he entered the room, revealing the silver hair and the piercing, intelligent eyes of a man who had spent 3 decades sending violent criminals to federal prison. It was my father, the Honorable Judge Elias Sterling. Darius stared at the man he had spent 7 years convincing me to hate. The sheer shock of seeing my father standing in our foyer backed by an entire squad of federal agents, momentarily paralyzed him. But Darius was a true narcissist, and his fragile ego violently rejected the reality of his own destruction. He lowered his hands and took a step forward, pointing an aggressive finger at my father. "What the hell do you think you are doing?" Sterling Darius yelled, his voice cracking with desperate rage. "You cannot just break into my house. I do not care if you used to be a judge. This is illegal trespassing and harassment." My father did not flinch. He did not raise his voice. He simply leaned on his cane and looked at Darius with an expression of profound, absolute disgust. It was the exact same look a person might give a cockroach right before stepping on it. "You have absolutely no authority here." Darius continued, frantically reaching down and scooping up the black leather folder along with Trent's fabricated medical chart from the coffee table. He shoved the papers aggressively toward the closest federal agent. "My wife is suffering from a severe psychological breakdown. She is a diagnosed danger to herself and her family. I have the sworn medical affidavit right here from a licensed surgeon proving it. And I am her legal guardian. She just signed the power of attorney transferring all her assets to my control. We have a state-licensed notary right here who witnessed it. You need to leave my property right now before I sue every single one of you." Trent stepped forward, trying to salvage his own authority. "I am Dr. Trent Vance," he announced, puffing out his chest. "I am a prominent orthopedic surgeon in this city. I personally evaluated the patient and signed that medical order. This raid is completely unjustified and highly traumatizing to a mentally fragile woman." My father slowly walked past Darius and Trent, completely ignoring their frantic legal threats. He walked straight over to my wheelchair. He reached down gently, placing his warm, strong hand over my trembling fingers. "Are you all right, baby girl?" he asked softly, his eyes scanning the massive fiberglass cast on my leg and the dark bruises blooming along my jawline. "I am fine, Dad," I whispered, a genuine wave of relief finally washing over my exhausted body. "I did exactly what you said." My father nodded. He turned around slowly, facing the panicked group of conspirators. He looked at Trent first. "Dr. Vance," my father said, his voice echoing through the silent room, "your medical evaluation is completely worthless. In fact, your medical license is effectively suspended as of 20 minutes ago. You are currently under federal investigation for falsifying official medical records to cover up a violent felony." Trent opened his mouth to argue, but the words completely died in his throat as two federal agents stepped up behind him, firmly grabbing his arms and snapping heavy steel handcuffs securely around his wrists. Darius panicked, stepping backward toward the kitchen. "You cannot do this. I have the signed paperwork. I own this house. I own her accounts. It is all perfectly legal." My father did not raise his voice to match Darius. He did not need to. He simply raised his left hand and gave a subtle, dismissive flick of his wrist. From the back of the federal formation, a woman stepped forward. She was dressed in a sharp, tailored burgundy suit, carrying a thick leather briefcase. She looked at Trent with an expression of absolute professional disgust. "My name is Dr. Eris Thorne," she announced, her voice cutting effortlessly through the rising panic in the room. "I am the director of the Georgia State Medical Board. Dr. Vance, we received a secure transmission of your activities early this morning." Trent tried to stand taller, trying desperately to wrap himself in his rapidly dissolving white privilege. "Listen to me, Dr. Thorne." Trent stammered, his voice completely losing its smooth resonance. "I am a top-tier orthopedic surgeon. You know my family, you know my practice. This is a massive misunderstanding. I made a valid psychiatric assessment based on a highly volatile domestic situation. That woman is dangerous." I did not let him finish his pathetic lie. I reached into the deep pocket of the oversized gray dress Jasmine had forced me to wear. I pulled out the heavy military-grade encrypted flash drive. I tossed it through the air. It landed on the center of the dining table, sliding past a plate of catered lobster and stopping right next to the crystal ice bucket. "Play it," I said simply. One of the federal tech agents immediately stepped forward, retrieving the drive and plugging it into a sleek black laptop he had placed on the credenza. He connected the laptop wirelessly to the massive 85-inch smart television mounted above the marble fireplace. The screen flickered black for a fraction of a second before springing to life in brilliant high definition. The entire room gasped. On the massive screen, the security footage from my kitchen played out with horrifying clarity. The hidden microphone had captured everything perfectly. Darius stood frozen, watching his digital counterpart on the television as he aggressively confronted me. Then the violence exploded. The digital audio broadcast the sickening sound of his large hands twisting into my braids. It showed my feet leaving the ground. And then the sharp, unnatural crack of my bone hitting the wooden cabinetry echoed through the silent living room. Jasmine let out a terrified whimper as she watched her own recorded image saunter into the frame wearing my silk robe, completely ignoring my agony. But the video did not stop there. The footage skipped forward automatically, triggered by the federal agent's presentation software. It showed Trent walking through the front door, dropping his designer medical bag on the marble island. Trent watched himself on the television, his face draining of every single drop of blood until he looked completely translucent. His arrogant recorded voice filled the room. The speakers amplified every single racist, misogynistic word he had uttered. They heard him explicitly agree to fabricate a medical chart. They heard him inject me with a heavy sedative without my consent. They heard him explicitly state that he was going to weaponize the angry black woman trope to manipulate the medical community and the police force. When the video finally paused on a frozen frame of Trent holding the empty syringe, Dr. Thorne turned back to him. Her eyes were blazing with absolute fury. "Trent Vance," she said, her voice completely devoid of any professional courtesy. "Your medical license is permanently revoked, effective immediately. Your clinic will be raided by federal agents within the hour to seize all patient records. You are an absolute disgrace to the medical profession, and you will never practice medicine in the United States again." The two federal agents holding Trent's arms jerked him backward. They forced his wrists together and tightened the heavy steel handcuffs. The sharp metallic clicking sound echoed off the high ceilings. Trent slumped forward, his knees buckling slightly. The arrogant, wealthy surgeon who had stood in my living room just 10 minutes ago lecturing me about my place in the world was completely gone. He was nothing but a broken criminal facing decades in a federal penitentiary. For a few seconds, the only sound in the room was Trent's heavy, ragged breathing. Then the reality of the situation finally penetrated Keisha's thick skull. She looked at her husband standing in handcuffs. She looked at the federal agents surrounding him. The comfortable, wealthy life she had built entirely on his income was evaporating right before her eyes. She completely snapped. Keisha let out a piercing, hysterical scream and lunged toward my wheelchair. "You evil, manipulative bitch!" she shrieked, her face twisted into a mask of pure hatred. "You set him up. You planned this whole thing to ruin my husband because you were jealous of my life. I will kill you, Nia." Before she could get within 3 feet of me, a massive federal agent stepped into her path, shoving her backwards so hard she tripped over the expensive rug and fell onto the Italian leather sofa. The vintage gold bangle she had stolen from me slid off her wrist and clattered onto the hardwood floor. "Sit down and shut your mouth, Keisha," my father roared, his voice booming with the terrifying authority of a federal judge. "If you move toward my daughter again, you will be leaving this house in the back of a police cruiser." I looked down at the medical wheelchair I had been confined to all evening. I was completely done playing the helpless victim. I looked at the federal agent standing next to my father. He nodded and handed me a pair of custom black forearm crutches my father had brought with him. I gripped the handles tightly. I engaged my core and pushed myself upward. The pain in my fractured leg flared hot and bright, but the sheer adrenaline coursing through my system smothered it completely. I stood up tall, balancing perfectly on my left leg and the crutches. I towered over Darius, who was still cowering near the dining table. I looked at Keisha, who was sobbing hysterically on the sofa, mourning the sudden loss of her white knight's unlimited credit cards. "You think I ruined your husband, Keisha?" I asked, my voice icy and completely steady. You think I am the villain because I installed cameras in my own home to stop a man from murdering me. You are crying over a man who looked at you and your entire family with nothing but racial disgust. But the most pathetic part is that you are blaming the wrong person. I did not ruin Trent. I turned my body slowly, using the crutches to pivot until I was facing the massive television screen above the fireplace. I nodded to the tech agent at the laptop. The person who ruined your husband, I said, pointing a steady finger directly at Darius, is standing right next to you. The tech agent clicked a button on the keyboard. The frozen video of Trent disappeared. In its place, a massive, highly complex financial flowchart illuminated the screen. It was a web of bright red lines, banking institution logos, and staggering dollar amounts. At the very top of the screen, the bold black letters spelled out Vance Orthopedic and Sports Medicine. Trent lifted his head, his eyes wide and bloodshot, locked onto the name of his beloved clinic. "What is that?" Trent rasped, pulling weakly against his handcuffs. "What are you showing me?" "That is a forensic money trail, Trent," I explained, projecting my voice so every single person in the room could hear the absolute truth. "It is a detailed map of exactly where the operational funds from your private medical practice have been going for the last 2.5 years. You hired your brother-in-law to handle your external billing because you thought keeping the money in the family was a smart business move. You gave him unfettered access to your accounts, and you never bothered to audit him because you were too arrogant to believe anyone could outsmart you." I raised my crutch slightly, pointing toward a large red circle on the right side of the television screen. It was a corporate entity name registered to a virtual office downtown. "That is Jasmine's maiden name." I continued, my eyes locking onto the young intern who was currently trembling behind the dining chair. Darius set up a network of phantom medical supply companies. He generated hundreds of fake invoices for surgical equipment that never existed. He processed the payments through your accounting software, and he funneled every single dollar directly into an offshore shell account controlled by his 24-year-old mistress. The entire room stopped breathing. The sheer magnitude of the betrayal hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. Keisha stopped crying, her mouth hanging open in absolute shock as she stared at her own brother. Jasmine pressed her hands over her face, terrified of the federal agent staring at her. But the most dramatic reaction came from Trent. The wealthy, arrogant surgeon stared at the bottom of the flowchart, where the total sum of the embezzled funds was highlighted in bright yellow. $2.5 million. He read the number silently, his lips moving, but no sound coming out. The realization hit him like a physical blow to the chest. The man he had just risked his medical license, his freedom, and his entire pristine reputation to protect was the exact same man who had secretly bankrupted him. The second secret had just exploded, detonating right in the center of their toxic alliance. The second secret had just exploded, detonating right in the center of their toxic alliance. Trent's breathing became erratic and shallow. He pulled violently against the heavy steel handcuffs, holding his wrists together behind his back, but the cold metal did not yield. His bloodshot eyes darted frantically across the massive television screen, digesting the irrefutable digital evidence flashing before him. He read the names of the phantom medical supply companies. He saw the exact dates and times of the fraudulent wire transfers, perfectly aligning with the days Darius claimed he was working late to help the clinic balance its books. The sheer scale of the theft was paralyzing. I took a deliberate step forward, using my custom black forearm crutches to balance my weight. I looked directly into Trent's pale, terrified face, ensuring that my voice carried the absolute finality of a judge delivering a death sentence. "You stood in my kitchen last night, Trent," I said, my tone dropping to a dangerous, icy whisper that commanded the entire room. "You looked me right in the eye and told me that I was a hysterical, unstable woman who could not handle the pressure of corporate success. You used your white skin and your prestigious medical degree to justify drugging me against my will and locking me inside a bedroom. You felt so incredibly superior, looking down at me bleeding on the floor." Trent stared at me, his jaw trembling uncontrollably. He had no arrogant medical jargon left to hide behind. "But look at the screen, Trent," I demanded, pointing the tip of my crutch toward the glowing financial flowchart. "Look at the man you called your brother. You despised me for being an independent black woman who paid her own bills, but you happily handed the keys to your financial kingdom to a man who played you for an absolute fool. The guy you just risked federal prison to protect is the exact same guy who embezzled $2.5 million from your clinic to buy designer goods for his young mistress." I turned my head slightly, locking eyes with the terrified 24-year-old intern cowering near the dining table. "That custom emerald green silk dress Jasmine is wearing right now?" I continued, my voice slicing through the heavy silence. "It cost $4,000. It was paid for by a fraudulent invoice for titanium surgical screws that your clinic never received. The vintage champagne you were just drinking to celebrate my destruction. You bought it, Trent. You funded this entire pathetic affair." Trent turned his head slowly. The mechanical creak of his neck was almost audible in the quiet room. He looked at Darius. The polished, charming sales director was sweating profusely. Darius was backing away, his hands raised defensively in front of his chest. "Trent, man, you have to listen to me." Darius stammers, his voice high-pitched and incredibly desperate. "The numbers are manipulated. Nia is a forensic accountant. She fabricated this entire presentation to turn us against each other. It is a setup. She is trying to ruin both of us." But the federal tech agent clicked another button on his laptop. The screen shifted to a new slide. It displayed a series of high-resolution photographs captured from the hidden camera positioned above my kitchen island. It clearly showed Darius sitting alone at the marble counter, his personal laptop open. He was visibly logged into the Vance orthopedic banking portal while talking on the phone with Jasmine, smiling as he initiated a massive transfer of funds to her shell company. The evidence was not just numbers on a spreadsheet. It was visual and completely undeniable. Keisha let out a low, guttural wail that sounded like a wounded animal. She looked at her brother with absolute venom. "You stole from us!" she screamed, her voice tearing through her throat. "You stole from my husband. We are losing our house, Darius. We are bankrupt because of you." The sophisticated, civilized mask Trent had worn his entire life began to melt away completely. The heavy, crushing realization that his medical career was permanently over, his finances were entirely destroyed, and his pristine reputation was in absolute ruins, pushed him straight over the edge of sanity. He was no longer a disgraced doctor standing in a luxury home. He was a man who realized he had sacrificed his entire life and his freedom for a parasitic thief. A primal, terrifying roar erupted from Trent's chest. It did not sound human. Using a sudden burst of adrenaline-fueled strength, Trent violently shoved his shoulder into the federal agent holding his left arm. The agent, caught completely off guard, stumbled backward, releasing his grip. Trent lunged forward. Because his hands were cuffed securely behind his back, he could not throw a punch. Instead, he used his entire body as a human battering ram. He launched himself across the dining room and crashed headfirst into Darius. The physical impact was explosive. Both men slammed violently into the edge of the heavy oak dining table. The table shifted sharply, tearing the white silk runner and sending the massive crystal ice bucket, expensive plates of catered lobster, and heavily poured glasses of vintage champagne crashing to the hardwood floor. The room erupted into a chaotic shower of shattered crystal and spilled liquor. Darius hit the floor hard, with Trent landing directly on top of him. The invincible alliance of villains completely shattered, disintegrating into a pathetic, bloody brawl right on top of my expensive living room rug. "You dirty, lying thief!" Trent screamed, his face turning a dangerous, mottled shade of purple. He drove his knee brutally into Darius's chest, pinning him to the floor. All the polite, progressive microaggressions Trent usually employed to mask his prejudice were instantly replaced by raw, unfiltered bigotry. The true ugly core of his character was finally exposed for everyone in the room to witness. "I brought you into my family." Trent spat out the words, dripping with deep racial disgust and venom. "I elevated you. I gave you a seat at my table. You worthless street trash. I protected you from the police, and you robbed me blind." You ruined my life. Darius, gasping for air from the heavy blow to his ribs, desperately tried to defend himself. He twisted his body and punched Trent squarely in the face. The sickening crunch of Trent's nose breaking echoed over the sound of Keisha's hysterical screaming. Bright red blood instantly gushed down Trent's chin, dripping onto the collar of his pristine charcoal bespoke suit. But Trent did not even flinch. The physical pain was absolutely nothing compared to the psychological agony of losing his millions. He rolled his body weight, pressing his heavy forearm directly against Darius's throat, pinning the larger man flat against the broken glass. Darius gagged, his eyes bulging as he struggled frantically to push the crazed surgeon off his windpipe. Jasmine screamed in absolute terror, covering her ears and pressing herself flat against the far wall, desperately trying to become invisible. Keisha dropped to her knees, crying hysterically, completely paralyzed by the sight of her wealthy white husband and her manipulative brother tearing each other apart like wild rabid animals. I stood perfectly still, balancing securely on my black forearm crutches. I did not look away. My father stood right beside me, resting his strong hands comfortably on his custom wooden cane. The dozen heavily armed federal agents in the room did not immediately rush forward to break up the fight. They stood in a wide, secure perimeter, holding their tactical positions. My father, the former federal judge, simply watched the carnage with a cold, calculating expression, allowing the two criminals to exact a small measure of brutal physical vengeance upon each other before the federal justice system locked them away forever. This was the ultimate payoff. This was the sweet, flawless execution of a trap designed not just to capture criminals, but to force them to completely destroy their own twisted loyalties. They had conspired together to lock me in a psychiatric ward and steal my 5-year-old child. Now they were bleeding on my floor, fighting over the worthless ashes of their own greed. Darius managed to land another heavy, desperate blow to Trent's jaw, but Trent was completely unhinged. He buried his face into Darius's shoulder, biting ferociously through the fabric of the navy blue suit. Darius howled in agonizing pain, thrashing wildly among the broken champagne glasses, slicing his own hands open on the sharp crystal shards. Enough, my father finally commanded, his deep voice cutting through the chaos like a heavy steel blade. The federal agents immediately swarmed the two men. It took 4 large tactical officers to pry Trent off Darius. They dragged the bleeding, disgraced doctor roughly to his feet. Trent was panting heavily, his shattered nose leaking blood down his ruined suit. He glared at his brother-in-law with a hatred so incredibly deep it was almost palpable. 2 other federal agents hauled Darius up from the floor. His custom suit was torn, his face was heavily bruised, and his hands were bleeding freely from the broken glass. The arrogant, charismatic sales director who had stood in my bedroom just this morning threatening to permanently terminate my parental rights was completely gone. He looked pathetic, weak, and entirely broken. The federal agents immediately pulled his arms behind his back and secured heavy steel handcuffs around his bleeding wrists. I looked at the two of them standing side by side in federal custody. The dining room was completely wrecked, smelling of spilled champagne, copper blood, and absolute defeat. But the air inside my home had never felt so incredibly clean. The parasites had finally been successfully removed. Despite being handcuffed and bleeding from his face, Darius refused to accept the reality of his situation. The narcissistic delusion that had guided his entire life flared up in one final desperate attempt to maintain control. He violently wrenched his shoulders, trying to shake off the federal agents holding him. "You can arrest me!" Darius shouted, spitting blood onto the ruined hardwood floor. "You can show all the fake flowcharts you want. But it does not matter. I still won. I have her signature." He nodded his head frantically toward the black leather folder lying amidst the broken crystal and spilled champagne. She signed the papers. Darius continued, a manic, desperate grin spreading across his bruised face. "My attorney notarized them. I am her legal guardian and I own this house. I own her bank accounts. Even if I go to prison, I am taking everything she built with me. She is destitute." My father did not look angry. He simply looked incredibly tired of dealing with a man so profoundly stupid. He slowly walked over to the dining table and picked up the black leather folder from the floor. He dusted a few shards of glass off the cover and opened it. "You really should have read the first paragraph when my daughter told you to. Darius," my father said, his deep voice echoing with absolute judicial authority. My father adjusted his posture, holding the crisp white legal document up to the light of the crystal chandelier. He began to read the text aloud, ensuring every single person in the room could hear the exact legal trap Darius had so eagerly signed. "This document is a formal confession of judgment and voluntary restitution agreement." My father read his words, landing like heavy stones in the quiet room. "By affixing my signature below, I, Darius Sterling, formally and voluntarily confess to the systematic embezzlement of $2.5 million from Vance Orthopedic and Sports Medicine." Darius stopped struggling. His manic grin vanished instantly, replaced by a look of sheer, unadulterated terror. My father continued reading the legal clauses with flawless diction. "I further acknowledge that the corporate entity managed by my associate Jasmine is a fraudulent shell company created for the sole purpose of money laundering. To provide immediate restitution for these crimes, I hereby voluntarily surrender all my personal assets, including my 50% equity in this marital home, and all contents of my personal banking accounts to my wife Nia Sterling." My father closed the folder and looked directly into Darius's panicked eyes. "You did not sign a power of attorney, Darius. You legally confessed to a multi-million-dollar federal wire fraud conspiracy. You signed a binding agreement to give my daughter your half of this house and every single dollar you have left to your name. And you were so incredibly arrogant that you had your own corrupt attorney notarize your confession, making it an absolute ironclad legal guarantee. You just legally bankrupted yourself and handed the federal prosecutors a signed confession." The silence that followed was absolute. The weight of his own colossal stupidity finally crushed Darius. His legs gave out completely. He dropped to his knees on the broken glass, weeping uncontrollably. He had orchestrated this entire elaborate night to steal my life, and instead he had gleefully signed his own financial and legal death warrant. Standing near the edge of the dining room, Jasmine suddenly realized that the luxurious fantasy she had been living was completely over. She looked at Darius crying on the floor. She looked at the federal agents. Panic completely overtook her. She grabbed my custom emerald green silk dress, hitched it up to her knees, and made a desperate sprint toward the shattered front door. She did not even make it 5 steps. A tall female federal agent stepped effortlessly into her path, grabbing Jasmine's arm and spinning her around. "Get your hands off me!" Jasmine screamed, kicking her expensive heels against the agent's tactical boots. "I did not do anything. I am just an intern. He lied to me. I do not want to go to jail. I am too young to go to jail. You are the registered owner of a fraudulent shell company that laundered over $2 million, the agent said calmly, pulling Jasmine's arms behind her back and snapping the steel cuffs securely around her wrists. "You are an accessory to federal wire fraud and grand larceny. You have the right to remain silent. I highly suggest you start using it." Jasmine collapsed into heavy, ugly sobs, her mascara running down her face, ruining the expensive makeup she had bought with my stolen money. I stood on my crutches, watching the federal agents begin to march the prisoners out of my house. Mr. Caldwell, the corrupt attorney, was led out first, his head hung low in absolute shame. Jasmine followed, sobbing hysterically and begging anyone who would listen for a second chance. Trent was dragged out next. He did not look at me. His arrogance was entirely shattered, leaving behind a broken, disgraced man who would spend the rest of his life paying for his own greed and racial prejudice. Finally, they pulled Darius to his feet. As they marched him past me, he lifted his head. His eyes were red and swollen, filled with a pathetic mixture of hatred and profound regret. He opened his mouth to speak, to offer some final manipulative apology or vicious threat. I did not let him say a single word. I simply looked at him and gave him the exact same cold, dismissive double blink I had given my daughter the night he broke my leg. "Get him out of my house," I said, turning my back on him completely. The agents shoved him forward, marching him out into the cool Atlanta night, where a line of federal transport vehicles was waiting with their red and blue lights flashing silently. Keisha, having witnessed the total destruction of her entire support system, scrambled out the door behind them, running toward her car without saying a single word to me. The house was finally empty of the poison that had infected it for so long. My father walked over and wrapped his arms carefully around my shoulders, mindful of my injuries. "It is over, baby girl," he whispered, kissing the top of my head. "You did it. You survived." I leaned against his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. "I did not just survive," I said softly, looking around at my beautiful home. "I won." 6 months later, the warm Georgia sun was shining brightly as I walked out of the massive glass doors of the Atlanta Federal Courthouse. I was not using crutches anymore. My leg had healed perfectly, leaving only a faint surgical scar that I wore as a badge of absolute honor. I stepped onto the concrete plaza, wearing a sharp, tailored ivory power suit and my favorite pair of red-bottom designer heels. The rhythmic click of my shoes against the pavement was the sound of a woman who had completely reclaimed her power and her peace. My left hand held a sleek leather briefcase containing the final certified custody and asset transfer documents. My right hand was holding the tiny, warm hand of my beautiful 5-year-old daughter, Amara. She skipped happily beside me wearing a bright yellow sundress and clutching a brand new teddy bear. "Mommy, are we going to get ice cream now?" Amara asked, looking up at me with her bright, innocent brown eyes. "We can get the biggest ice cream sundae in the entire city, my sweet girl." I smiled, squeezing her hand. "We have a lot to celebrate today." The legal proceedings had concluded with devastating efficiency. The digital evidence and the notarized confession were absolutely insurmountable. Darius was sentenced to 15 years in a maximum security federal penitentiary, without the possibility of early parole for aggravated assault, extortion, and wire fraud. He lost all his parental rights entirely. Amara would never have to see his face or endure his manipulation ever again. Trent suffered a fate arguably worse than prison for a man of his profound arrogance. He was stripped of his medical license permanently. He was sentenced to 10 years for medical malpractice and conspiracy to commit fraud. Because Darius had spent all the embezzled money, Trent's private clinic was forced into immediate bankruptcy. The bank foreclosed on his massive Buckhead mansion and seized all his luxury vehicles. Keisha was left entirely destitute. Stripped of Trent's wealth and my financial support, she was forced to move into a tiny, cramped apartment on the outskirts of the city. She was currently working a minimum-wage retail job, completely alienated from the affluent social circles she used to terrorize. And Jasmine, the young intern, who thought she could steal my life, took a plea deal. She received 3 years in a minimum security facility, but her status as a convicted federal felon meant her dreams of a glamorous corporate career were permanently destroyed. They had all tried to bury me. They had relied on the toxic societal expectation that a strong Black woman is supposed to endlessly absorb pain, betrayal, and abuse to keep her family together. They thought my strength meant I would simply carry the heavy burden of their crimes in absolute silence. But they fundamentally misunderstood what real strength actually is. Real strength is not allowing yourself to be a sacrificial lamb for toxic people who share your blood or your last name. Real strength is looking at a system designed to silence you and deciding to completely dismantle it from the inside out. Real strength is protecting your peace, your assets, and your children with the ruthless precision of a predator protecting its young. I walked to my car, lifting Amara safely into her car seat and securing the buckle. I looked back at the towering federal courthouse, taking a deep breath of the fresh spring air. I had rebuilt my relationship with my father. I had secured my financial future. Most importantly, I had taught my daughter that she never has to accept abuse from anyone, no matter who they are. We are not obligated to heal the people who intentionally break us. Sometimes the only required closure is a locked door and a federal indictment. If you have ever found yourself trapped in a toxic family dynamic or a manipulative relationship, I want you to know that your silence does not protect you. It only protects them. You have the power to meticulously document your reality, set unbreakable boundaries, and take your life back. You do not have to be the strong one who suffers. You can be the smart one who wins. Have you ever had to outsmart a narcissist or cut ties with toxic family members who tried to drag you down? How did you plan your escape and reclaim your peace? I want to read your stories of triumph and survival, so please share them in the comments section below. If my journey resonated with you today, please hit the like button and subscribe to the channel for more stories about resilient strategy and the beautiful reality of walking away from toxicity. Share this video with any woman who needs a reminder that she is the architect of her own destiny and that living a successful, peaceful life is the absolute greatest revenge. Thank you so much for watching, and remember to always keep your receipts.